Hi, everyone. Welcome to NiceGamLii Chanel. If you find this content interesting or helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos. Your support means so much to me, and it helps me create even better content. Thank you so much.
When I was 1 year old, I picked myself a little wife during my first birthday grab test. My mom didn't believe in superstitions. She picked me up and put me back at the starting point, trying to keep me away from her best friend's daughter. But who knew that the little baby girl would crawl towards me on her own, grab my face, and start pinching it. Seeing how unexpected their baby's reactions were, both mothers decisively arranged a childhood engagement for us. When we were little, my childhood sweetheart tricked me out of my New Year's money, saying he was my future husband, and that my money was his money. Then he completely emptied my little stash. Until middle school, when my childhood sweetheart's whole family moved abroad, that childhood engagement came to an end. One day, when I had just arrived at school, my deskmate Liu leaned over and said, "I heard that our class is getting a transfer student, and they're from abroad." I responded indifferently. "It's not like I've never seen a foreigner before. Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" After saying that, I lay down on my desk and went to sleep. Soon, in the afternoon, just as I entered the classroom, Liu started gossiping again. "Finally, you're here. Let me tell you. Remember the transfer student I mentioned this morning? They've already arrived at our school. They're currently in the academic office." A class rep from the neighboring class went to grade papers just now. When he saw the transfer student, he was so mesmerized. He actually took out his phone and secretly took pictures in the office. Not only was he caught red-handed by the director, but his phone was also confiscated. He's still getting scolded right now. I was stunned. How could he dare to take out his phone in the academic office? Just how attractive must this person be? Liu got even more excited. So unrealistically beautiful. "All right, I just borrowed the class monitor's phone. Do you want to see? I can borrow it for you again." I shook my head. Forget it, forget it. The transfer student is in our class anyway. I'll see them sooner or later. The first class was Chinese, but since all the teachers were busy grading papers, our homeroom teacher, Yichen, was also involved. So this period turned into a self-study session. As the class representative, I was called to the office, helping the teachers record scores in the academic office. My classmates kept reminding me, "Make sure to get a good look at the transfer student. Remember their face well. When you come back, you need to write a 1,000-word essay describing their appearance." Good luck, class rep. Hurry up, class rep. And while you're at it, check my test score too. I nodded in agreement. Then, taking my pen and notebook, I headed to the academic office. Inside, Teacher Li and a group of students were busy, all sorting through stacks of graded papers. I glanced around briefly. Everyone was a familiar class rep, not a single unfamiliar face, and definitely no outrageously beautiful girl in sight. Maybe this meant I wasn't destined to meet the transfer student. So, I simply put them out of my mind and joined in the paper sorting task. The teachers were responsible for recording scores. As class reps, our job was to pick out our class's papers from the huge pile of graded tests. I spotted a few familiar names and secretly jotted down their scores in my notebook. But I was out of luck. I searched through papers for an entire period, yet I couldn't find my own test. Looking at the dozens of papers from my class, not a single one had a high score. No wonder old Shen was so furious. At that moment, I overheard the teachers chatting. That student from abroad. I heard their foreign language scores are pretty impressive. Yeah, I checked their previous transcripts. They're excellent in other subjects too. How did old Shen manage to snatch such a genius? I realized they were talking about the transfer student. I felt a little overwhelmed. So, the transfer student is not only attractive, but also a straight-up academic genius? Up until now, I'd only heard about their stunning looks. I didn't expect them to be a top student too. Some nearby students also overheard and started whispering among themselves. "This is insane. Our school actually got such a legendary transfer student. I have a feeling that from now on, there's going to be a long line of boys outside class 3 every day." Peeking through the window, one of the class representatives knows me. He poked me on the arm and taught me a money-making trick. Lock your classroom windows and doors and pull the curtains shut. Anyone who wants to see the transfer student has to pay 5 yuan per minute. Guaranteed to make you rich. Another guy sniffed and rubbed his head, grinning foolishly. Is his face really worth just 5 yuan? I paid 10 yuan to look at him for a minute. I'd even pay 1,000 yuan just to touch him. I was amazed by what I heard. Just how good-looking could he be? The guy nodded obsessively again. Seriously, from head to toe, he's beautiful down to his shoes. Ridiculously beautiful. I was about to say something, when the class bell rang, to avoid delaying our next class. The teachers clapped and said we could leave now. So I grabbed my notebook and hurried back to my class to report the midterm results to my classmates. Just as I reached the third-floor staircase, I saw the hallway packed with people, and almost all of them were boys. I figured the transfer student had arrived in the classroom. I looked around, but didn't see any blonde-haired, blue-eyed foreigner. I couldn't help but feel a bit of romance. Then I walked into the class under the envious gazes of the students. During the break, the classroom was in chaos. Seeing me walk in, a few enthusiastic students quickly asked me, how did our class do? Since the classroom was surrounded by people, I felt too embarrassed to tell the truth. So I cleared my throat and handed out my scorebook, letting them pass it around themselves. My seat was the second to last row inside the classroom, by the window. As I walked closer, I realized that my deskmate Liu was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a girl was sitting there, wearing a blue JK dress and a baseball cap. She was sitting there with her head down, because the cap's brim was covering it. I could only see a beautifully curved jawline and smooth, pale skin. The girl was holding a test paper, intently focused on it. Judging by her posture, she looked like she was here for a parent-teacher meeting. I thought maybe Liu had called his parents, so I stopped in my tracks, hesitating for a moment. I glanced around, looking for someone to ask about the situation, but then I noticed that both inside and outside the classroom, everyone was looking at me with expressions full of envy, which only made me even more confused. Then, I saw Liu sitting in the very last row. His face was filled with excitement and complex emotions as he stared at me. He was mouthing something frantically, but his expressions were so exaggerated that I couldn't understand a single word. At that moment, the girl sitting in my seat suddenly lifted her head. Her gaze was cold as she looked at me. "Are you coming in?" she asked. The moment I saw her face, I suddenly realized what Liu had been trying to mouth. Transfer student. The transfer student. But wasn't the transfer student supposed to be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed foreigner? I widened my eyes and accidentally blurted out my thoughts. But with so many people watching me, I quickly turned my head to a nearby classmate to change the subject. "Did we switch seats?" From the back row, Liu suddenly stood up. Speaking rapidly, he said, "No, class rep for Chinese. Your seat hasn't changed. It's still in the same place." After saying that, he quickly sat back down, leaving me standing there awkwardly. In this strange atmosphere, the transfer student seemed to realize something. She slowly straightened up, scooting her chair forward along with her desk, making space for me to sit down. Then, she lifted her head and stared at me. "That's right," she said. "My deskmate is the class rep for Chinese." She even seemed to put extra emphasis on the words "my deskmate." Hearing her say those words, I suddenly understood. Old Shen had arranged for the new transfer student to sit with me, the class rep for Chinese. This definitely meant that the transfer student had spent too much time abroad, just returned, still not fully used to speaking Mandarin, so they speak a bit slowly. I replied with a quick thanks, then squeezed into my seat through the space they made. Just as I sat down, the class bell rang. The boys peeking through the window outside hesitated, but eventually left unwillingly. The classroom also quieted down. Everyone started preparing for class. A strange silence filled the air. Yet, many people were still sneaking glances in our direction. At that moment, the transfer student suddenly muttered a number, 64. I heard it, and instinctively felt like they were talking to me, following their gaze. I looked down at the test paper on the desk. English midterm 64 points. I immediately sat up straight and pulled the paper toward me, looking at the brutally marked corrections. I let out a small protest. Then I checked the name next to the score. It was my test paper. I didn't even have time to feel sad. I suddenly remembered Liu. He said his score was less than half of mine. That meant he didn't even get 32 points. The transfer student seemed to glance sideways at me, but I didn't notice. Under the pressure of my low score, I quickly shifted into study mode. It just so happened that this was an English class. I listened intently. The English teacher was explaining a reading comprehension passage. It was a story about an international student. Halfway through, the teacher suddenly paused and turned toward my direction. "I heard we have a new transfer student in our class. Could this student, please, translate this passage for us?" The classmates finally had a valid reason to openly stare in our direction. I also turned to look. On the transfer student's desk, there was only one book lying open, a brand new English textbook. I glanced again. Noticing that the page was still on the introduction, I pushed my test paper to the middle of the desk. The transfer student tilted their face slightly towards me. Their gaze was no longer as indifferent as before class. The sunlight filtering through the window reflected in their copper-colored pupils, like a piece of glimmering glass. In that brief moment of eye contact, I was hit by another wave of stunning beauty. That was when I noticed. At some point, the transfer student had taken off their baseball cap. Even every strand of their hair looked absurdly perfect. The transfer student moved the test paper to the middle of the two desks, then stood up slightly, tilting their head down, and translated the entire reading comprehension passage from start to finish. They did it effortlessly. The English teacher, impressed, started clapping, clearly very satisfied with the new student. The classmates followed with enthusiastic applause. Obviously, they were just as impressed by the students' looks. The class flew by quickly. By the time it ended, my test paper was still lying in the middle of the desks. The transfer student remained leaned back in their chair. I wasn't sure if they had looked at my test or not, but I keenly sensed that they had secretly glanced at me several times. But that was impossible. I must have been so dazzled by their beauty that I was overthinking things, maybe even deluding myself. So, when class ended, I left my pen and ran off. Passing by the back row, I didn't see Liu. But the moment I stepped outside, there he was, waiting for me at the door. He dragged me to a quiet corner before he could bombard me with questions. I cut him off just in time. I've met the transfer student. Sure enough, Liu froze on the spot, utterly dumbfounded. So, I told him all about my earlier encounter, including how I accidentally knocked the transfer student over. Liu's eyes sparkled with excitement. What kind of fate is this? This is way too much of a coincidence. Yichen, you must be incredibly lucky in romance. Sitting next to a stunning beauty is one thing, but to have such an insane first encounter too. I scratched my head. Yeah, they're good looking, but it's a hassle. Forget it. You wouldn't understand. I didn't have the guts to admit that. I kept feeling like the transfer student had been watching me throughout class. And during our morning collision, I could swear they let out a soft laugh. But that all just sounded like my imagination. Liu smiled and patted my shoulder. How could I not understand? Is it that happiness came too suddenly? Or, you don't know how to face such a gorgeous girl in the future? I rolled my eyes at him and snapped. Shut up. We chatted until it was almost time for class before heading back. The moment I stepped into the classroom, I saw that my seat was surrounded again. Or to be more precise, the transfer student was surrounded. I noticed my test paper on the desk, and on top of it, a black phone. The screen displayed a QR code. Several boys from other classes stood nearby, holding up their phones as well. It looked like they were scanning the code to add WeChat. Some guys on the outskirts couldn't scan it properly, so the transfer student, being considerate, lifted the phone up for them. Liu's expression became colorful. He leaned in and whispered, I know people abroad are open-minded, but the transfer student looks pretty cold and aloof. Didn't expect them to be so proactive. I didn't respond. I just nodded silently. After watching for a while, Liu patted my shoulder. You were right. Beautiful, definitely. But definitely troublesome too. As expected, you can't have both beauty and loyalty. Soon, the class bell rang. The boys left excitedly. I calmly returned to my seat. The transfer student reached out and put their phone away. At the same time, I reached out to take my English test paper back. In that instant, both of our hands appeared on the desk at the same time. Under the sunlight, the small red mole on our wrist was strikingly visible. Seeing that tiny red spot, I froze on the spot. The transfer student didn't seem to notice this coincidence. They naturally asked, "What's the next class?" But I suddenly turned to look at the transfer student's face, studying them carefully. After being stared at for a while, the transfer student finally couldn't take it. They turned their head to meet my gaze. I stammered Chinese. How's your math now? The transfer student's tone became more natural. I froze for a moment. I nodded. It's okay. The transfer student's eyes curved as they looked at me. Then, have you decided yet? I don't know. I suddenly froze. I didn't know how to respond. Nor did I want to respond. Right now, I only wanted to figure out one thing. Seeing that we both had a small red mole on our wrist, I suddenly realized, why did this transfer student look so much like the nightmare of my childhood? The girl next door, she also had a small red mole on her wrist. Because of that, we were often jokingly called a golden couple as kids. Can I ask for your name? Even though the truth was right in front of me, I still didn't want to believe it. The transfer student raised an eyebrow slightly. Just as they were about to answer, the classroom door swung open. Old Shen walked in, carrying a stack of test papers. Class rep for Chinese, hand out the papers. So, I never got my answer. Like in a dream, I stood up, dazedly walking to the podium to distribute the papers. Old Shen always liked to mix in praise and scolding, using it to motivate everyone. This time was no different. Whoever's name was called had to come up and collect their paper. By the end, only 2 papers remained. Jiang Yichen, 125. The room was filled with hushed whispers. Jiang Yichen is the top scorer again. Maybe even the highest in the school this time too. After all, the test this time was insane. The class rep is too strong. The questions were tough, yet his score is even higher than last time. But actually, I wasn't the highest, because underneath my paper, there was another one with a score of 137. It wasn't a name from our class. I thought the papers were mixed up, but when I looked closer, I noticed that the information field on the paper only had a name. No class or section was filled in. It must be a teacher's copy. Otherwise, missing the details would mean no score. I put the paper down. Old Shen, standing beside me, said, "Keep reading." I hesitated for a moment. Then I said, "Su Qingru, 137. The class instantly exploded with chatter. "Who is that? They're not from our class, right? Does anyone know them?" No one. Suddenly, someone seemed to realize something. They became visibly excited, grabbing the people around them and whispering furiously. After finishing the roll call, I was about to return to my seat. But then, I saw my transfer student deskmates slowly straighten up. Then, they stood and walked toward me. That familiar face left me staring blankly. Su Qingru smoothly pulled the test paper from my dazed hands. Seeing my expression, they curled their thin lips slightly. A faint smile appeared. Old Shen looked quite pleased. "Let's have the new student introduce themselves." Su Qingru gave a polite smile to the class. "Hello, everyone. My name is Su Qingru. I graduated from Homerton College in the UK. I look forward to learning from all of you." Hearing that name, something clicked in my memory. Su Qingru then added meaningfully, "I am a citizen of Wagwo." At those words, I froze again. Old Shen passionately led the class in applause. "Only after returning home do you realize how great our motherland is, right?" Su Qingru slightly raised a hand and responded politely, "Of course, our motherland is the best." I wasn't sure what I was feeling. Floating in a daze, I made my way back to my seat. As I sat down, I saw Su Qingru go back to the podium. They picked up something. My test paper, which I had left behind. This childhood friend was different from my memories. They had really matured. Standing on the podium with the 2 of us, they looked like an adult. They could converse with Teacher Chen effortlessly. Meanwhile, I felt like a child. Suddenly, I thought, maybe my childhood nightmare was truly in the past. Was bullying me back then? Just because we were kids? Growing up means maturing. So, out of my boundless generosity, I'll forgive Su Qingru for everything they did to me. I started feeling a little pleased. I reached out to take the test paper from Su Qingru, but they didn't let go. Instead, they flatly said, "Idiot." Hearing that, I was utterly confused. But Su Qingru calmly released their grip on my test paper. So calmly that I thought I had imagined it. I was stunned. Slowly, I took the test paper, placed it on my desk, then quickly turned my head, sneaking a glance at them. Did I mishear, or did they really call me an idiot? As soon as class ended, I ran again. I dragged Liu Yu to the same secluded corner from before, and immediately blurted, "I know them." "Dude, you said that last period." Liu Yu looked incredibly excited. He cut me off eagerly. "Let me speak first. I just heard something." His whole body was practically buzzing with excitement. "You know how last period, all those guys from other classes were adding the transfer student on WeChat? I thought it was kind of weird. Why didn't any of the guys from our class try? I mean, we have a few pretty bold ones." Then, after they all left, I finally heard from our classmates. The QR code the transfer student gave them wasn't even theirs. Guess whose it was? I shrugged. "It couldn't be yours, right?" Liu Yu smacked me lightly. "Come on, think. The transfer student just got here. Who else would they know?" I shook my head. "I have no idea." Liu Yu grinned mischievously. "It was old Kin's." I opened my mouth, completely stunned. I couldn't even imagine the moment old Shen saw his WeChat flooded with new friend request. What would his reaction be? Liu Yu let out a dramatic sigh. "That's ruthless. If I were one of those guys, I think I'd hold a serious grudge against Su Qingru. That was just brutal." Then he continued, "Hey, The transfer student is both stunning and doesn't casually flirt around. Jiang Yichen, being their desk mate. You must have saved the galaxy in your past life. But hearing this, my expression turned complicated. I didn't look happy at all. Liu Yu didn't notice. He was still lost in his beautiful fantasy about Su Qingru. Casually, he asked, "Oh yeah, what were you about to say earlier?" Calmly, I said, "I know Su Qingru." Liu Yu just smiled and nodded dismissively. "Well, now I know Su Qingru too. Even their names sound so nice." I added, "Su Qingru lives next door to me." Liu Yu whipped his head around, looking absolutely shocked. "You're messing with me, right?" I replied firmly. "Su Qingru is my childhood friend. We've known each other since we were in the womb, but they moved away in 4th grade. And now, it looks like they've moved back." Liu Yu was completely baffled by this chain of revelations. "Are you serious?" I sighed. "If I'm lying, I'm your son." Liu Yu, overwhelmed, pinched his own arm and yelped in pain. After rubbing the sore spot, he grabbed my shoulders and shook me excitedly. "You have the ultimate advantage. You'd be a fool to waste this opportunity. In a week, I want to see you as the official boyfriend of the school flower in front of the entire school." My mouth twitched, and suddenly, I remembered the idiot from earlier in class. Frustration welled up in me. Gritting my teeth, I said, "We're not even close. We were even enemies once. If we have any relationship at all, it's purely a parent-child one." Liu Yu gave me a look, biting his lip in frustration. His curiosity was instantly piqued. "What kind of dark history do you have? Spill it, right now." So, I reached into the corners of my memory and dug up some of the most tragic bullying incidents and started telling the story. I thought Liu Yu, even if he didn't take my side, would at least sympathize with my experience. But instead, all I saw was Liu Yu's mischievous grin and his envious gaze. "I've known Liu Yu for 3 years. I know exactly what that look means." Annoyed, I asked, "What romance novel are you imagining now? The cold beauty who eventually gives in? The mischievous older girl next door?" Liu Yu looked completely fascinated. "Jiang Yichen, do you even realize some girls express their feelings by bullying?" I was speechless. After holding back for a while, I shook my head. "You don't get it. You didn't live through those dark years. Su Qingru was the nightmare of my childhood." Liu Yu lazily replied, "Well, childhood nightmares can sometimes turn into adult fantasies." I clenched my teeth. "Yeah, right. You seriously need to stop reading those trashy novels." We kept chatting until we reached the classroom door, and by the water dispenser at the back door, we ran into Su Qingru. She was staring straight at me, her lips slightly curved up, holding a disposable cup from who knows where. She lazily stood there, filling it with water. Liu Yu winked at me. I pretended not to notice, calmly walking past her and returning to my seat. Liu Yu had been moved to the last row. As soon as he sat down, he subtly started observing the back door. Su Qingru didn't even fill her cup all the way. She handed her water card to a guy next to her and softly said, "Thanks." The guy who received her thanks immediately turned bright red. Gathering his courage, he said, "Hi. I'm Shen Jie. Nice to meet you." Liu Yu froze for a second. Hearing the introduction, he turned to look at the guy and realized it really was Shen Jie. His face immediately twisted in frustration. Not him again. Shen Jie had been his rival since middle school. It finally seemed like something was happening. The goddess would bring him bubble tea every few days. But somehow, at some point, Shen Jie had gotten close to her. While Liu Yu was still debating when to confess, the two of them were already watching couple movies together. And now, Shen Jie was trying to get close to Jiang Yichen's childhood friend. This was beyond infuriating. Liu Yu glanced at me, sitting at my desk, reading a book. His eyes flickered with an idea, and he made up his mind. He quickly grabbed my water cup. Under my puzzled gaze, he looked at me intensely and asked, "Are you thirsty, Jiang Yichen? I'll get you some water." Back when we were desk mates, we used to get water for each other all the time. I just assumed he was bored, so I agreed. Sure. Liu Yu quickly headed to the water dispenser. I glanced in his direction and saw that Su Qingru was still standing there, and Shen Jie was standing next to her. I knew about Liu Yu's history with Shen Jie, And now, Liu Yu was so eager to fetch water, specifically using my water cup. Wait, I suddenly had a bad feeling. Just as my thoughts were running wild, I noticed Sukingru glancing in my direction. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I immediately looked away, pretending to glance at the classroom's back wall poster. Then I calmly looked back, as if I was only checking the time. Meanwhile, Liu Yu had arrived at the battlefield. Shen Jie only spared him a brief glance, but kept talking. I traveled to the UK during middle school. At that moment, Liu Yu suddenly interrupted. Sukingru, your deskmate, wants you to get him some water. Hearing this, Sukingru seemed momentarily stunned. Shen Jie's words were cut off mid-sentence. Liu Yu held out the water cup, as if this was actually a real request. It almost seemed legitimate. Sukingru naturally took the cup. But she didn't have a water card, and Liu Yu had no intention of giving her one. He simply handed the cup of water to Sukingru. The cup was passed over with the words, "Then please take it back to him." After saying that, Liu Yu hopped away cheerfully. He didn't even spare Shen Jie a glance. Shen Jie was both angry and confused. Liu Yu was being too obvious. It was clear he was targeting him. But what puzzled him was why Liu Yu brought up Jiang Yichen while provoking him. Hadn't Sukingru just become his new deskmate? Were they already that close? But Shen Jie wasn't worried. Jiang Yichen was just a bookworm. He had studied abroad and just returned. How could Sukingru possibly be interested in someone like that? Thinking of this, Shen Jie felt a little better. Knowing that Liu Yu was watching him, he deliberately reached out and handed over a card. With an intentional, gentle smile, he said, "Use mine." But I couldn't just keep watching them. So I had to lower my head and continue reading. But in truth, I was restless. Something felt off. What was Liu Yu trying to do? At the edge of my vision, I saw a figure approaching. A hand reached out and placed a cup filled with warm water in front of me. I immediately lifted my head, scowling. "You took so long, what bad things were you doing with my cup?" Sukingru's hand, which was holding the cup, paused. Then, the corner of her lips curled into a smirk. "What? Are you mad I took so long?" I hadn't expected Sukingru to be the one bringing my cup back. I was stunned. My fierce expression instantly turned into awkward stammering. Why are you the one fetching my water? Where's Liu Yu?" Sukingru responded nonchalantly. "You mean the classmate who gave me his cup?" She spoke while taking a seat. I turned my head. Sure enough, Liu Yu was making exaggerated facial gestures at me. I glared at him fiercely. Sukingru watched my fuming expression. Suddenly, she raised her hand, but halfway up, she hesitated. I turned my head just in time to catch her odd movement. Instinctively, I backed up against the wall in caution. "What are you trying to do?" Sukingru withdrew her hand. Slowly, she retracted it as if nothing had happened. At that height, it almost looked like she was about to pat my head. I vaguely recalled that back when we were in elementary school, the mischievous girl from next door used to mess up my hair all the time. And now, someone I had nearly forgotten from the corners of my memory was suddenly standing right in front of me. At that moment, I couldn't quite believe it was real. I hesitantly leaned closer and whispered, "Kingru, is that really you? You're the Sukingru I know, right?" Sukingru raised an eyebrow. She leaned in slightly as well, and her tone carried a hint of displeasure. "I thought you recognized me." The moment I walked into the classroom, I pursed my lips, suppressing the strange, restless feeling rising within me. That odd, excited emotion. "Nope, I completely forgot about you." I extended my wrist, revealing a small red birthmark. "If I hadn't seen your birthmark, I wouldn't have remembered at all." Sukingru flipped her own wrist over. The position of the red birthmarks on both of our wrists was almost identical. There was a subtle sense of fate in it. For some reason, her tone suddenly became indifferent. She simply responded with a light "oh" and said nothing more. It was only then that I realized what I had said just now might have been a bit rude. I quickly tried to explain. What I meant was, it's been so many years. It was all in the past, right? You can't expect me to have remembered you all this time. Wait, no. You can't expect a kid to have a perfect memory. But Sukingru wasn't having it. Then why didn't I forget you? I froze. Regret flashed through my mind, maybe because my appearance hadn't changed at all. The more I spoke, the worse it sounded. So I shut up completely. Sukingru remained silent for a moment. Then suddenly she let out a chuckle. "Yeah, you've been a clown since childhood." I was furious. When we were kids, this big sister used to mess with me a lot. But now, I didn't know whether to refute her or to mock her back. If I refuted it, wouldn't that make me seem self-absorbed? But what could I even mock her for? Sukingru wasn't ugly at all now. Calling her ugly wouldn't have any impact. As I hesitated, I had already missed the best timing for a response. Annoyed, I turned my head away, slumped over my desk, and focused on my workbook, ignoring her. But Sukingru seemed to be in the mood to talk. She poked my arm with her pen. Lazily, she said, "Jiang, my dear classmate, don't just focus on your own work. Your new deskmate doesn't even have a single book." I ignored her and focused harder on my workbook. I even pushed my book further into the corner. But Kingru refused to give up. She kept poking me with her pen. "Jiang." The problem was, the wall was on my left. There was nowhere left to move. I was like a trapped rabbit, cornered by a hunter. I could only curl up and shield my workbook. I practically buried myself into my desk. Sukingru let out a half-hearted sigh. She seemed like she was about to say something. But before she could, a male voice interrupted. "Sukingru, you can use my workbook first. I have to leave next period to work on the class bulletin board. I won't be in class anyway." The voice belonged to Shen Jie. Both Sukingru and I turned to look at him. Shen Jie stood in the aisle. He looked perfectly at ease under our stares. He reached out and handed over a workbook. Sukingru's gaze shifted to the cover. The words Shen Jie were written on it. His eyes were calm. His face showed no emotion. But he didn't hand the book to me. It was a little strange. Shen Jie sure was unusually enthusiastic today. He wasn't like this before. I turned to look at Sukingru. At the same moment, she turned to look at me. Our eyes met. For a brief second, I was caught off guard by the coldness in her gaze. This was getting even more confusing. Was he hesitating to accept it? I hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took Shen Jie's workbook on his behalf. I placed it on his desk. "Here, take it. Our class is very caring, after all." Sukingru's gaze grew even colder. She seemed to glare at me. I blinked innocently. Now this was even more confusing. Sukingru lowered her gaze for a moment. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "Thank you, Shen Jie." Shen Jie glanced at me. He smiled. "No need to thank me. If you ever need anything, Su, just come to me. I don't mind helping." He made it sound like the reason I hadn't given Sukingru my workbook was because I found it troublesome. I had no idea why Shen Jie suddenly seemed so hostile toward me. Maybe he was just annoyed about the whole water fetching thing earlier? It wasn't an unreasonable thought. After all, my seat was in the southwest corner. Shen Jie's seat was in the northeast corner. It would be a hassle to go all the way over there. But the fact that Shen Jie went out of his way to bring Sukingru a workbook, that was definitely a hassle. At that moment, in a split second, I suddenly realized something. Had Shen Jie been watching us the entire time from his seat? What was he looking at? Could it be? I swallowed nervously. I snuck a glance at Sukingru. Could it really be love at first sight? Truly, beauty is a curse. Shen Jie seemed to choke for a second, as if he wanted to say something sharp. But when he saw Sukingru pursing her lips slightly, he decided against it. Not that it mattered, his goal had already been achieved. He had been observing us from behind for a while now, and he had come to a conclusion. I was strangely skilled at flirting. Instead of speaking normally, I insisted on leaning in closer. What could they possibly need to whisper about? They had What kind of secrets did they already have? And then there was all the dramatic slumping over the desk, as if they thought no one could tell. Shen Jie had come over specifically to put a stop to it. "All right, I'm heading out. Just leave it on my seat when you're done. It's right over there." Shen Jie pointed to his seat behind them. Sukingru tilted her head, glanced at it, then nodded. "All right, bye-bye." Shen Jie smiled warmly. He waved and walked away. I suddenly felt like a third wheel, like I was completely unnecessary here. The bell rang just then, but the teacher hadn't arrived yet. I stopped looking at Sukingru, pursed my lips, sat up straight. I sat quietly in my corner and continued my work. Sukingru also sat still in silence, but she wasn't completely motionless. Her gaze shifted from the empty desk to me, sitting quietly and focused on my work. She noticed that my bangs covered part of my eyes. She couldn't see my expression at all. She frowned slightly in frustration. 5 years had passed since we last met, and 5 years was a crucial time for growth. So much had changed. My facial features had matured. My brows had sharpened. My features had become more defined. But that foolish, clueless air about me hadn't changed at all. It made her want to mess with me. That morning, when Su Qingru left her house, as soon as she stepped out of her complex, she saw a boy kicking pebbles as he walked. He seemed completely lost in thought. That bad habit of his made her recognize him instantly. But it had been 5 years. She wasn't 100% sure. She wanted to get closer to confirm, but she didn't want to seem too obvious. So, she came up with a plan. She'd accidentally bump into him and apologize. Then, she could take a closer look. As she brushed past me, she smiled. She was happy to see me again. She thought I would stop and greet her. But instead, I just kept walking. Now, as I worked on my exercises, something started to feel off. My arm was resting on the desk uncomfortably. I shifted to the right. Then I realized that Su Qingru had pushed me against the wall. She still hadn't moved back. The classroom was quiet. After squatting for 3 seconds, I turned my head to look at Su Qingru. It seemed like our eyes met for a brief moment. But Su Qingru was just watching Shen Jie's practice book. I was stunned for a second. I thought to myself, that must have been a coincidence. I didn't think much of it. I took out my pen, then lightly tapped on the desk between us. When Su Qingru turned her head toward me, I softly said, "Su, you've crossed the boundary line." Su Qingru glanced at me indifferently. Where did I cross it? When Yan, I frowned. You're sitting in the middle of the desk. She had only been abroad for a short time, and it was fine if she struggled with language upon returning. But did she go blind too? Of course, I only thought this to myself. I could only tap my pen on the desk again. See the line dividing our desks? Su Qingru shrugged indifferently. She waved a hand. Boundary line? Are you serious? I stared at her speechlessly. But my glare had no effect. I probably looked like an angry little puppy. Su Qingru raised an eyebrow. Then, mercifully, she decided to let me off the hook. She moved away on her own. We didn't say another word until the end of class. But I did notice something. Su Qingru. She hadn't even flipped open Shen Jie's practice book. As soon as class ended, she immediately had a girl sitting across the aisle pass the book to Shen Jie. Her reason? I don't know where Shen Jie sits. The girl's name was Song Mengmeng. She was quite talkative. She could chat with anyone. Originally, she had thought that Su Qingru looked difficult to approach, so she had temporarily given up on interacting with her. But she hadn't expected Su Qingru to talk to her first, and her tone didn't sound as cold as her appearance suggested. So after passing along the workbook for her, she started chatting with her. At first, I wasn't paying attention, but Song Mengmeng talked a lot, so I couldn't help but overhear. Just in time to catch her say, "Have you ever eaten Beijing roast duck? I think roast suckling pig abroad probably tastes the same as roast duck. After all, they're both roasted. Our lotus leaf roast chicken is pretty good too. When we have time, we should go out for seafood barbecue at that one snack spot." Su Qingru smiled faintly. "I don't eat meat." Meng Meng let out an "oh," then continued, "I think electric grilled roast duck is crispier. Now that the country is promoting new energy, we should support electric grilling. Traditional charcoal grilling pollutes the environment a little." Su Qingru just smiled faintly, but didn't reply. I figured Su Qingru must think that Song Mengmeng was going way off track. The afternoon passed like that, other than focusing on my studies and dozing off a few times. I also had to smack Liu a couple of times to stop him from running his mouth. Don't blabber. I didn't want people knowing about my connection with Su Qingru. There was nothing to talk about. Bringing it up would feel like showing off, and I had always been low-key. But it seemed the heavens had no intention of letting me stay that way. After school in the afternoon, I packed my bag, grabbed a few test papers, and prepared to go home to get scolded. Dad was meeting an old friend. I had no idea when he'd be back tonight. When Mom got angry, usually, only my dad, with his gentle nature, could say a few words to calm her down. Thinking about it left me feeling drained all afternoon. Su Qingru seemed to notice too. She saw me spacing out at my English test paper and glanced at me sideways. She let out a quiet chuckle. Her tone was teasing. "Don't tell me you're still worried about. Are you crying because you did badly on the test?" I snapped back to reality and glared at her. "Of course not," I said dryly. Su transferred just in time for our monthly exams, so she had taken 3 tests in the office: Chinese, math, and English. And now, they were all laid out on her desk, except for Chinese. She had scored a perfect 150 in both math and English. Even though she didn't get a perfect score in Chinese, she still ranked first in the class, maybe even the whole school. I gritted my teeth. Asterisk, how is she this good at everything? Asterisk. Su slowly gathered up her test papers. You did so badly. I figured you wouldn't want to see my test scores right now. There was no one around. I glanced left and right. After confirming that no one could see me bullying the new student, I bared my teeth and glared at her. I don't even want to see you. Su blinked, her expression unreadable. That's not gonna work out well for you. I let out a cold laugh. Shouldering my backpack, I turned and left. Su followed me out of the classroom. Right at the door, we ran into Song Mengmeng. She looked at us and casually said, "You and Su seem pretty close." She said it without much thought, but others were definitely paying attention. A few guys in the hallway had been chatting, but now they were sneaking glances our way. The moment Song Mengmeng said that, the whole hallway seemed to go silent. I immediately went into panic mode. I put on my most serious expression and blurted, "Su couldn't find the school gate. I'm just showing her the way." Song Mengmeng just let out a casual "oh." She didn't think much of it. She just said goodbye and hurried downstairs. She always left school as soon as possible. I didn't dare look at Su face, so I just muttered, "Let's go, Su." I sped up a few steps, then slowed down to make sure she was keeping up before walking ahead again. On the way down, I could hear people whispering nearby. The new transfer student. I even saw someone pointing directly at me. He must have accumulated great virtue in his past life. That's why he gets to sit there in this life. Hearing this, the transfer student sitting next to me was speechless. He was about to step forward and argue, but before he could, Su had already caught up with us, walking side by side with me. Outside the school gate, there was a long avenue lined with cherry blossom trees on both sides. It was called Sakura Avenue. The cherry blossoms here were all of the October Sakura variety. Right now was their blooming season. Every day after class, boys and girls would come here to admire them. The mesmerizing flowers almost blur one's vision. Every time I walked past here, I couldn't help but slow down to savor the scent of cherry blossoms in the air. Today, there was a slight breeze. The wind carried the cherry blossom petals, making them drift through the sky. The scene was breathtakingly beautiful. Several students, seeing that no teachers were around, secretly took out their phones to take pictures. I also wanted to capture this moment, but since I wasn't supposed to have a phone, I didn't dare take it out. After all, our school had endless tricks for catching students with phones. However, there was a certain newly transferred student who still needed to stay connected and was allowed to keep his phone. My eyes lit up. Excitedly, I turned around. I was about to ask Su to lend me his phone. But then, I heard a click. My excitement instantly faded. I stiffened as I turned to see Su holding up his phone, camera pointed at me. He was wearing a cap. He lightly pressed the brim and said, "Oops, you caught me." But his tone didn't sound apologetic at all. I quickly ran up to check his phone. "What did you take? Let me see." Su swiftly shoved his phone into his pocket. "In broad daylight, you can't just force me, you know." Well, I couldn't exactly reach into his pocket and snatch it from him. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just flustered. I looked at his pocket, then at his ridiculously handsome face. In that moment, he looked stunning. I was momentarily stunned. My face instantly turned red. I angrily shouted, "Su I've grown up now. You can't bully me like before." Su shrugged indifferently, even though his face was partially hidden by his cap. His perfect physique still attracted quite a few gazes in our direction. Seeing this, I quickly turned around and walked away. If I couldn't handle him, at least I could avoid him, right? Thinking about how the bad older sister who used to bully me as a child was now my desk mate, I couldn't help but quicken my pace. Just as I stepped out of the school gate, someone called out, "Yichen." I stopped in my tracks, glanced around, but didn't see any familiar faces. Did I mishear? I hesitated for a moment, then continued walking. Just as I reached the side of the road, I caught sight of a black sedan pulling up beside me. The front window rolled down, revealing a well-groomed, wealthy-looking face. With a smile, the person called out again, "Yichen." The face was both unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. I gasped, covering my mouth in surprise. From behind me, Su Qingru's voice rang out. Mom. It was Aunt Su. When I was little, I really liked her. She was our neighbor, living right next door. What a coincidence, she said, smiling. Qingru, you're here too. Yichen, do you still remember me? I called out. Aunt Su. Of course, I remember. Sugar-coated pork, braised pork belly. Su Qingru scoffed, walking past me and opening the car door. Now you suddenly remember everything. I felt a bit awkward. Aunt Su glanced at both of us, then smiled and said, Come on, let's go. Your parents are waiting at the hotel. So that was it. At lunch, my mom had mentioned that my dad was meeting an old friend. She was talking about Uncle Su. After driving for about half an hour, we arrived at the hotel. Sure enough, my parents were already there. Then, I saw the middle-aged man sitting beside my father. I politely greeted him, Uncle Su. Uncle Su smiled and nodded in response. He stood up from his seat and walked over to me. Comparing my height to his, he said, You've grown so much in just a few years. My dad chuckled. That's right. In the blink of an eye, he's already in high school. It feels like just yesterday he was still wetting the bed. Hearing this, I immediately wanted to dig a hole and crawl into it out of embarrassment. After catching up for a while, everyone took their seats. I sat next to my mom. Su Qingru sat next to his mother, which meant we ended up sitting right next to each other. As we sat down, Su Qingru even pulled out my chair for me. I was speechless. Was this really the Su Qingru I knew? He acted like a completely different person in front of the elders. My mom gently nudged my arm. Aren't you going to thank your sister? Seeing my reluctance, my mom added, What's wrong? This is your sister Qingru from when you were little. Do you not remember her? At that moment, Aunt Su chimed in. What a coincidence. When we were transferring Qingru to a new school, he randomly chose a class. It just so happened to be Yichen's class. And now, they're even desk mates. Thankfully, the topic of calling him sister was finally diverted. I sighed in relief but still felt frustrated. I glanced sideways at Su Qingru, who was sitting to my right. Such a great actor. Just as I finished mentally complaining, Su Qingru suddenly took a deep breath. He turned to me and said slowly, Little Chen, you're the Chinese class representative, right? I'll probably need a lot of help from you. Isn't that right, little Chen? Hearing him call me little brother, I immediately felt like something was off. And that last drawn-out Chen, it made me feel like I'd just been electrocuted. I shuddered as goosebumps rose all over my body. It was absolutely unbearable. But all the elders were watching me, so I had no choice but to force a fake smile. Qingruji, you must be joking. Su Qingru raised her elegant eyebrows slightly, but she didn't say anything. Uncle Su looked at my dad and laughed heartily. The kids have grown up. They don't even want to call each other brother and sister anymore. Back in our day, we used to call each other by single characters. Hearing this, I couldn't help but imagine, if it were still my parents' generation, would I have to call Su Qingru just Ro? My dad also sighed nostalgically. Yeah, back then, I used to call you Hung every day, and call Zhao Chun's mom by. Now no one does that anymore. Even my usually composed and dignified mother looked slightly shaken. Her temple twitched slightly. She took a sip of tea to suppress her emotions. Aunt Su teased, Yichen, if you're too embarrassed to call her sister, just call her Qingru instead. Uncle Su nodded in agreement. I was completely taken aback. I turned to look at Su Qingru. Forcing myself to stay calm, I said, Qingru. Su Qingru still didn't say anything. In front of the elders, he was acting way too obedient, just the right amount of politeness and a soft smile. As the conversation shifted to other topics, the waiters started serving dishes. Midway through the meal, Aunt Su suddenly slapped her thigh. She nudged Uncle Su and said, Oh right, I almost forgot. You didn't even remind me. Uncle Su froze for a moment, then suddenly remembered something. My brain is a mess, I left it in the car. Saying that, he pulled out his phone and called the driver. Bring up the black box from the trunk. I hadn't really been paying attention to what the adults were talking about. Suddenly, a lobster was dropped onto my plate. I was startled for a moment. I turned my head to see Su Qingru sitting down his chopsticks, looking completely indifferent. I frowned at him. What are you doing? Su Qingru, not getting the reaction he expected, sighed regretfully. Then, in an extremely annoying tone, he asked, So, you're not afraid of lobsters anymore? I remember when you were little, one pinched you. Didn't that traumatize you? The adults were engaged in lively conversation. They weren't paying attention to us at all. I knew he was up to no good. I glared at him angrily. Of course, I've grown up. Do you think I haven't changed after all these years? Su Qingru smiled at me. Your English is still terrible, though. I was instantly speechless. I scoffed. Even if I haven't improved, at least I haven't regressed like someone else, getting more childish by the day. Oh my, little Yichen. Qingruji doesn't like hearing that. Su Qingru drawled lazily. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he narrowed his eyes. A mischievous smile spread across his face. Come on, Yichen. Call me Qingruji and let me hear it. Hearing that, I immediately turned away and ignored him. I grabbed my drink and took a sip. Just as I was about to swallow, someone suddenly called out, Zhao Chenchen. I choked in shock. Coughing violently, I covered my mouth. My mom hurried over. Drink slowly. What kind of manners is this? Su Qingru calmly handed me the napkins. I coughed even harder. By the time I finally regained my composure, Aunt Su had walked over. She handed me a beautifully wrapped red velvet box. Yichen, this is a gift for you. I hadn't expected to receive a gift. Quickly, I stood up and accepted the box. Thank you, Aunt Su. Uncle Su chuckled. Qingru was the one who picked it out. Aunt Su added, making me freeze for a moment. I glanced at Su Qingru, who was watching expectantly. Taking a deep breath, I muttered, Thank you, Qingruji. Su Qingru grinned, No need to thank me. Now, open it and see if you like it. Hearing that, I sat down and untied the ribbon on the box. I pressed the small latch on the outside of the box. The box automatically opened. Inside was a fountain pen. It was a beautifully designed pen with a sleek look. I had to admit, the moment I laid eyes on it, I really liked it. Soon, the banquet came to an end. Everyone left satisfied. Back home, I lay on my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. My childhood nightmare had returned. And not only that, he had transferred into my class. To make things worse, we were now desk mates. Though, to be fair, it didn't seem like a nightmare anymore. But his personality was still as irritating as ever. The next morning, I struggled to get up. Even though I was awake, my brain was still half asleep. After washing up, I went downstairs for breakfast. I was about to sit down when I noticed my dad giving me a knowing look. My mind snapped awake instantly. Whenever Dad gave me that look, it meant one thing. Mom was about to scold me for something I had done. Sure enough, when I turned my head, I saw my mom glaring at me. Yichen, I just saw the grade sheet in the class group last night. Do you know what rank you got this time? Come here and look for yourself. I don't know, I answered weakly. I only knew that the entire class had done badly this time. The rankings hadn't been announced in class. I walked over, took her phone, and glanced at the list. Rank 35, name, Jiang Yichen. I had dropped from 9th place to 35th. Dad had already found out last night. He patted my shoulder reassuringly. It's normal to do poorly once in a while. Sometimes, you have to fall to remember what it feels like to be on top. Mom shot him a sharp look. Then she turned back to me. Go get your test papers. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. Reluctantly, I put down my phone and took out my backpack. I spread my test papers on the table. Mom was clearly furious. She didn't even pick them up. Instead, she just stood there, looking down at them with an icy expression. Dad checked the time. Dear, he reminded her, if Yichen doesn't leave now, he's definitely going to be late. A small monthly test? You don't need to put so much pressure on the child. Before Mom could argue back, Dad turned to me and said, Put your test papers away. I'll drive you to school. On the way, Dad didn't mention the test at all. When we arrived at school, I ran towards the teaching building and bumped straight into Shen Jie. Both of us froze. Shen Jie quickly regained his composure. He let out a cold, mocking snort. Then, as if something occurred to him, his eyes flickered with mischief. With a sarcastic tone, he said, Yichen, you did pretty well this time, huh? Rank 35. I smiled and nodded. Not bad. Not as good as you, though. I had never really paid attention to Shen Jie's rank. But I vaguely remembered you mentioning before that Shen Jie's rank was usually among the bottom 20. Somewhere near the very end, Shen Jie continued, looking smug. I improved this time. By 3 whole ranks. I chuckled. Too lazy to respond, I turned and walked into the classroom. As soon as I entered, I saw a group of students gathered in front of the multimedia screen. Curious, I walked over. Sure enough, they were discussing the ranking results. So I squeezed in to take a look. On the second page, I spotted Shen Jie's name. Rank 52. Our class had a total of 65 students. At that moment, I couldn't help but smile for real. Shaking my head, I walked back to my seat. But Shen Jie wasn't ready to give up. He chased after me. Jiang Yichen, what are you laughing at? Didn't I improve? Aren't you the one who's falling behind? I glanced at him and replied, yeah, so what? Shen Jie grinned smugly. So at this rate, I'll surpass you soon. How does that feel? Are you panicking now? No way, someone beside us chimed in. What do you think this is, poker? You win one round. I win one round. Liu Yu walked over. He placed a carton of yogurt on my desk. With a cheerful smile, he said, Yichen, I'm here to feed you. Then, Liu Yu turned to Shen Jie. In a deliberately high-pitched voice, he said, oh, Shen Jie, do you want one too? I have a walnut-flavored one that boosts brain power. Hearing that, Shen Jie shot us a furious glare, then stormed off angrily. I watched his retreating figure. I couldn't help but ask, so this is how he really is? Kind of cute. This was probably my first real interaction with Shen Jie, and he was nothing like I had imagined. Liu Yu scoffed. You mean to say he's dumb, right? He's ridiculously dumb. If you told me he won my goddess's heart by acting dumb, I might actually accept it. But he's not just dumb. He's also incredibly annoying. I frowned slightly, then looked at Liu Yu in confusion. Why does Shen Jie suddenly have such a grudge against me? Yesterday, what exactly did you do with my water bottle? I haven't even had a chance to ask you yet. Liu Yu froze instantly. Then, with a flattering smile, he said, Yichen, look, I even bought you yogurt as an apology. So this yogurt was actually a peace offering? I really hope that wasn't the case. I mean, I just happened to see the rankings. Liu Yu quickly tried to change the topic. Then he leaned in close and whispered, I just wanted to mess with him. So I handed your water bottle to Sue. And I told him, your deskmate asked you to fetch him some water. Also, I didn't give Sue a water card. So he used his personal VIP water card to get your water. Hearing that, I felt both touched and slightly conflicted. But before I could explode, Liu Yu bolted. I wanted to chase after him, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw a striking figure walk into the classroom. And just like that, my feet were glued to the ground. After hesitating for a moment, I sat back down. Su Qingru entered the classroom but didn't return to his seat right away. Instead, he stopped near the multimedia screen. He glanced at it a few times. Su had this natural stay-away aura. A few students instinctively stepped aside, so he could get a better look. The only person in class who had ever spoken to Su, the class monitor, was also watching. Seeing him checking the rankings, he felt the need to explain to this top student who had just returned from studying abroad. So he said, Su, don't be misled by the low scores in our class this time. It's just that the exam was too difficult. Everyone's scores are low because of that. But even in such a tough exam, we can still see some rising stars holding their ground. For example, our class study representative still managed to maintain a 3-digit score, and our math representative, he scored an impressive 120. Meanwhile, Su Qingru listened as if he wasn't really listening. He occasionally responded with a soft hum, but his gaze didn't follow the spots the class monitor was pointing at. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on one particular place. The class monitor continued, and our Chinese representative, who is also your deskmate Jiang Yichen, his Chinese score is still leading the pack. First in class, second in the grade. Wait, why can't I find his name? The class monitor scratched his head awkwardly. This is unexpected. He was always consistently in the top 10. Didn't expect him to bomb the exam this time. Hearing this, Su Qingru lifted his head and looked at me. Our eyes met. Just as he was about to return to his seat, the class monitor suddenly remembered something and called out, Su Qingru, Mr. Chen asked you to go to the academic office to collect books. Su Qingru put down his white backpack. He pushed it forward slightly. All right, the class monitor added. Do you remember where the academic office is? If not, let Jiang Yichen take you there. Su Qingru obviously knew. The words lingered on the tip of his tongue. But in the end, he swallowed them and smiled. Oh. I actually forgot. I really didn't want to deal with him. So I made up an excuse and told the class monitor. But I have to collect the Chinese homework. The class monitor widened his eyes. Right now, I still have a few questions left to finish. Nope. You have to go. You can collect the homework later. By then, I'll have finished mine too. I felt a little frustrated. Jiang Yichen. This is what it means to shoot yourself in the foot. Class monitor. You're amazing. The class monitor quickly dashed back to his seat and started finishing his homework. With no choice left, I reluctantly stood up and followed. We walked one behind the other in the hallway. I stopped outside the office and peeked inside. All the subject teachers were there, so I backed up against the wall and turned to Su Qingru. You can go straight in and find Mr. Chin. I'm leaving now. Saying that, I turned around and was about to leave. Su Qinglu gently tugged at my sleeve. A good person should help to the end. You can't just quit halfway. She adorably blinked at me. Language class representative. I looked at the tightly shut office door. Countless times, I questioned myself, why did I agree to stay? Sure enough, women who know how to act cute have the best luck. As it turned out, Su Qingru was right to have me stay. There was a thick stack of books Su Qingru needed to collect. Aside from that, there were also 2 sets of uniforms, one for autumn and winter, and one for spring and summer. All were wrapped in plastic bags. The bags were very smooth. As Su Qingru walked into the office holding the stack of items, the uniform bag slipped from her arms. They landed right at my feet, so I picked them up and held them in my arms instead. Let's go, Student Su. Su Qingru smiled at me. Okay. As we passed the music room, a melodious and beautiful piano tune drifted out. I quickly ran a few steps forward. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window, I peeked inside. Su Qingru, a few steps behind, caught up with me. Seeing how engrossed I was, she also looked inside. Inside the music room, there was a young man and woman. The girl was playing the piano. The boy sat beside her, holding a violin in his arms. Occasionally, he gave her a few notes. That senior is Chu Mengyao, I proactively explained to Su Qingru. She plays the piano exceptionally well. She's always the grand finale in school events. She even took over a music teacher's class for a semester, while the teacher was on maternity leave. Su Qingru snorted and asked, "What about the boy?" I glanced at the young man. That senior is Yichen. He's quite famous, good-looking, and his grades have always been in the top 10 of our year. He often serves as the host for school events. Rumor has it he's the son of the school director. Su Qingru snorted again. She sarcastically commented without emotion. A talented man and a beautiful woman, a perfect match. Don't talk nonsense. They're not in that kind of relationship. I was afraid the people inside would hear us. I hurriedly glared at her, but it seemed like they still heard us. The piano music gradually stopped. Chu Mengyao looked towards the glass window. She smiled gently. I waved at her, smiling happily as well. And Yichen also glanced outside. His gaze swept past me, but when he saw Su Qingru, he froze. I didn't notice. I pointed forward to Chu Mengyao, then mimed a walking motion. Finally, I waved at her again, indicating that I was leaving. Chu Mengyao also smiled and waved back. Then I turned to Su Qingru. Let's go. Can you still carry everything? I'll carry it for you. After saying that, I took the books from her arms and hugged them to my chest. All right, let's go, Student Su. She hummed in agreement. She lifted her foot and followed. As we walked past the glass window, I glanced back into the music room. Chu Mengyao was still smiling, watching us return to class. I placed the books on my desk. Then I plopped down onto my seat, panting from exhaustion. You're already out of breath from just this, Su Qingru teased. I caught the sarcasm. Annoyed, I shot back. And who was all this for? Su Qingru huffed but said nothing. He stayed silent for the rest of the class. When class ended, I wanted to get some water. I planned to ask Su Qingru to move aside a little, but before I could speak, Su Qingru suddenly looked up at me, smiling warmly. His tone was gentle too. Going to get water? I'll get it for you. I was a little suspicious. We had only been desk mates for a day, but I had already concluded that he was more childish than before, just as bad as he used to be. He rarely ever had such gentle moments. I didn't believe it. After thinking for a moment, I suddenly realized, you just want to borrow my water card, don't you? When Su Qingru heard this, her smile froze at the corners of her mouth. I placed my water bottle and water card in front of her. You have to go to the office on the 2nd floor to apply for and recharge your own card. Are you still waiting for the school to give you one? And stop smiling so fake like that. Su Qingru's forced smile disappeared completely. She let out a cold snort, then, in an icy tone, spat out for words. Go yourself. I knew it would turn out like this. Pretentious. A childish, nasty weirdo. Now Su Qingru had another label, unpredictable. In the end, I didn't go to get water, because Liu Yu came over and asked me to go to the snack shop with him. Su Qingru slowly moved her chair aside from me. Liu Yu loves spicy strips the most. Almost every time he buys snacks, he gets a pack or two. This time was no different. As soon as we entered the supermarket, he headed straight for the shelf filled with spicy strips. Watching Liu Yu, I also started craving those junk food snacks. But I'm a bit allergic to spicy strips. I still have some allergy cream from last time. If I eat just a little, it should be fine, right? I stood there hesitating for a long time. Then I turned to Liu Yu. Liu Yu, grab another pack, will you? Liu Yu hadn't forgotten that I couldn't eat spicy strips. You want to eat them? I just want a taste. But honestly, Liu Yu definitely wouldn't let me. So, thinking I was clever, I said, I'm not eating it. I'm getting it for Su Qingru. He wants to eat it. Really? Su Qingru doesn't seem like the type to eat junk food. Maybe he just likes spicy stuff. I secretly felt pleased. I nodded along. Then I thought after eating, my mouth would definitely smell strong. I should get a drink to cover the taste. So I asked Liu Yu, do you want a drink? What, did Su Qingru ask you to buy him a drink too? No. I just want one myself. Bringing him a bottle of water would be fine too. As I finished speaking, a sudden realization struck me. It was almost like an epiphany. Liu Yu's words reminded me. That's right. Su Qingru doesn't have a water card or a cup. Wait. Then why did he borrow my water card? Could it be that he was actually being kind and getting water from me? I was stunned, and Liu Yu was too. What nonsense are you talking about? I didn't know how to explain. Even I wasn't completely sure myself. So I just shook my head. Nothing. I'll bring a bottle of water for Su Qingru too. What do you want to drink? I can grab it for you as well. Liu Yu had already chosen his snacks. Let's go. I'll come with you. Meanwhile, in an unnoticed corner, after we walked away, on the other side of the snack shelf, a boy stood there, deep in thought. His phone screen was still on a message conversation. It contained a short dialogue. The girl we saw in the music room today. Is she Jiang Yichen's girlfriend? I've never seen her before. I don't know. But I heard that Zhao Chun and the others helped to transfer student move-in. I saw them carrying textbooks and uniforms. From the direction of the academic office, it should be him. The boy hesitated for a long time. Then, feeling a bit nervous, he tapped on another person's profile picture and sent a message. Do you know the name of the new transfer student in first year? The reply came quickly. If you're talking about the famous one, I know. His name is Su Qingru. The person replied again, teasing. Brother Cheng, you're not usually interested in gossip. Why are you suddenly so curious about this transfer student? He quickly typed a response, nothing. Wrong person. When Liu Yu and I returned to class, it was almost time for the lesson to start. So we had to save the snacks. For the big break, I sat down with my bag of snacks, under Su Qingru's gaze. I awkwardly explained, don't look at me like that. This is for the whole day. I'm not eating it all at once, and I'll be sharing with my friends. I actually can't eat that much. Su Qingru's lips curved slightly. What are you explaining for? I didn't say anything. I replied calmly. Your eyes just betrayed you? You were thinking I'm a pig, weren't you? That I eat like a pig. As soon as I finished speaking, I saw Su Qingru raise an eyebrow. By the time I realized what I had just said, it was too late. Su Qingru nodded. That is indeed a fact. I let out a cold laugh. Then I pulled out the soda water I had gotten for him and tossed it directly into his arms. And to think I was kind enough to bring you water, yet someone here is cursing me behind my back. Su Qingru caught the soda water I threw at him with one hand. He was startled for a moment. Clearly, he hadn't expected me to actually bring him something. He looked at the bottle, then looked back at me. Su Qingru raised his voice slightly, dragging out the words, Thank you, Jiang. I seized the opportunity to ask about the conversation before we went to the convenience store. Had I misunderstood something? Just as I was about to speak, the class bell rang. Lao Chen walked in right after, so I had to keep quiet for now. I decided to ask later, after class. This time, Lao Chen wasn't just here for the Chinese lesson. He also took the first 10 minutes of class to hold a short class meeting. He briefly summarized the recent monthly exam, and especially praised the students who had made progress this time. He also casually mentioned, students with good grades shouldn't be arrogant. Once you get cocky, others will leave you far behind. I instinctively felt like he was talking directly to me, as if he was scolding me. So I lowered my head in shame. Finally, the class was over. As soon as the bell rang, I lay on my desk to sleep. Yesterday, I performed really well, but because of Su Qingru's arrival, I was too shocked to feel sleepy at all. I just couldn't fall asleep. But today, after completely accepting that the weird transfer student was my childhood friend, feeling sleepy seemed only natural. As I dozed off, I still pretended to hold a pen in my hand. The pen cap was off. At first, the tip was pointed downward at my notebook, but as drowsiness overtook me, my hand tilted, following my head as it fell onto the desk. Now, the pen was pointed at my own face. The class break was noisy in the back rows. The noise made me stir slightly. My arm tensed up. A ticklish sensation spread across my face. In my dream, a distant, light laughter echoed in the sky. Su Qingru was watching me. I was unconsciously drawing all over my face with the pen. Drawing and drawing. Soon, a tangled, messy ball of black lines had appeared on my face. He watched with great interest, not interrupting me at all. He even had the urge to take out his phone and snap a picture. But when he reached into his pocket, it was empty. Only then did Su Qingru remember that after Lao Qing completed his paperwork yesterday, he had forbidden him from bringing a phone today. A bit of a pity. I was still moving unconsciously, expanding the range of the black scribbles on my face. Soon, I would look like a complete doodled cat. Su Qingru had seen enough. He was about to do me a favor and take the pen from my hand. But before he could act, a hand suddenly reached out from diagonally behind him and took the pen away. Then, they lightly patted my shoulder. I didn't react. Su Qingru turned to glance back. It was a girl he didn't recognize. She was holding 2 cups of milk tea. Cold mist was still rising from them. She looked at me, then glanced at Su Qingru, who was sitting beside me. She froze for a moment, then she casually averted her gaze. She glanced at the label on the milk tea and placed one of the cups on the windowsill beside me. At that moment, Yu happened to walk over. His view was blocked by the girl. So, he didn't see that I was asleep. Yu exclaimed, "Hey. Yang Yuding, you're here." Yang Yuding smiled slightly. She handed the other cup of milk tea in her hand to Liu. "This is for you." "Thanks, Tingji, you actually remembered me." Liu grinned as he took the milk tea. He was about to shower her with praise, saying something sweet, but then he suddenly remembered that Su Qingru was right next to him, and instantly, he swallowed his words. At that moment, Yu felt like he was witnessing a love triangle drama with Jiang Yichen as the main character. Only then did Liu notice that I was sleeping on my desk, and that my face was covered in black scribbles. Liu smacked my back. "Jiang Yichen, if you don't wake up now, I'm going to sell you off." I yelped in pain, barely managing to move my eyelids. Still half asleep, I groaned, "Don't call me. I'm seriously exhausted. Let me sleep a little longer." "Bro, get up and look at yourself in the mirror." Liu was speechless and irritated. Still half conscious, I reached out blindly and happened to touch someone. Thinking it was Liu next to me, I patted Su Qingru comfortingly. Then I grabbed his hand, rested my head on it, and mumbled, "She?" Su Qingru, with his arm trapped under my head, looked speechless. Liu couldn't bear to watch the awkward scene any longer, so he pressed his cold milk tea against the back of my neck. After 2 seconds, I jerked awake and smacked the back of my neck. Then I bolted upright in terror, still half dazed. I looked up and saw 3 people staring at me. For a moment, I thought I was seeing double, but after a closer look, I realized the 3 figures looked different. Even the doubles had different genders. I widened my eyes and took a good look. I slowly became fully awake. "What's wrong with you guys?" Liu lifted his chin, gesturing for me to look at my greedy hands. I followed his gaze, reacting a second too late. Then, I saw my hand resting on Su Qingru's forearm. My eyes widened instantly, and I quickly withdrew my hand. My ears turned a bit red. Trying to act tough, I scolded first. "What are you doing putting your arm under my hand?" Su Qingru tilted his head, staring at me speechlessly. Liu couldn't bear to watch me embarrass myself any longer. He pulled out a napkin and slapped it onto my face. "Shut up, will you? At least wipe your face first." I thought I had drooled in my sleep. Embarrassed, I reached to wipe my mouth. Liu grabbed a compact mirror from a nearby female classmate and held it up to my face. I stared at my reflection for 3 whole seconds. There were people all around. I barely managed to swallow my scream, but anyone could see that my emotions were anything but stable. Yang Yuding tried to comfort me. It's fine. It looks kind of cute. If you feel embarrassed, I can draw all over my face too. It was only then that I realized Yang Yuding was here, and I froze for a moment while wiping off the black scribbles from my face. I asked her, "Why are you here? Didn't you say you were going to another school for an exchange? Is it over already?" The ink was hard to remove. I rubbed my face red, but it still wouldn't come off. Yang Yuding replied, Not yet, but I came back to grab something from school. Passed by a milk tea shop on the way, so I brought you guys some." Yang Yuding pointed at the windowsill. "Your favorite roasted milk tea, with ice and pudding and red bean pearls." I was touched. Sukingru suddenly glanced at me. I caught it from the corner of my eye. After a brief silence, as if he had just remembered something, he said to Yang Yuding, "You don't have to always remember the whole order every time." As if I eat a lot. Yang Yuding chuckled. "Is it all just toppings?" Sukingru sneered. "Are you drinking 8 treasure porridge?" Both of them spoke almost simultaneously. I slowed down the hand wiping my face. For some reason, the atmosphere right now was making me feel extremely uncomfortable. Was it because there were too many people? Liu Yu, who was watching from the side, had a very animated expression. Spectators always love to stir things up. I responded to Yang Yuding first, "But it sounds like a lot." Then I put down the mirror, covered my ink-stained cheek, and glared at Su Qinglu. Yang Yuding seemed like she wanted to say something. Just as she opened her mouth, I turned to Su Qinglu. "By the way, why do I suddenly have pen marks on my face? I didn't even have a pen. Did you draw on my face while I was asleep?" Su Qingru actually laughed. She said darkly, "Jiang Yichen, if you fall asleep again next class, I'll finish you off." Yang Yuding glanced at Su Qingru again, and quickly said, "It wasn't her. Don't blame the wrong person." When I arrived, I took the black pen out of your hand. I let out an "oh." Su Qingru shot Yang Yuding a cold glance. Yang Yuding then said, "Go to the restroom and wash it with water. You won't be able to wipe it off like that." Liu Yu chimed in from the side, "Bring some snacks too. And milk tea. After washing up, let's head to the field and eat." I nodded, took out the snacks from my desk pouch, and dug through my bag for my wallet. "What are you taking money for?" Liu Yu asked. "Are you buying something?" "No." I kept counting, then took out 15 yuan and handed it to Yang Yuding. "Here, for the milk tea." Yang Yuding pushed my hand back. "Why are you giving me money? Friendships sink when you do things like this. If you feel bad, just treat me next time." I thought about it and agreed. So I put the money back and continued holding one side of my cheek. We quickly left the classroom. Suddenly, it became quiet around Su Qingru. The noise felt distant from him. Everything in the world changes every second. People do too. He lowered his head and gave a self-mocking smile. Then he stood up and left as well. The group of us sat down under the shade of a tree on the field. I started opening snacks with Liu Yu. Yang Yuding popped a potato chip into her mouth and said, "Jiang Yichen, your new deskmate. How come I feel like I've never seen him in your class before?" I thought for a moment, then I quoted what I had heard from others about Su Qingru, a top overseas student, both talented and good-looking. Then I added my own comment. "Looks polished and glamorous. But in reality, he's a moody, rude little witch." Liu Yu was totally lost. "What the heck did you go through today? Why is your opinion of him so low?" "I've been through too much." But since Yang Yuding was right there, I didn't say much. I just shook my head. The ink stain on my face wasn't fake. Yang Yuding seemed a bit relieved. She figured it would be better to ask Liu Yu about it privately later. We shared the snacks with Yang Yuding. Before we knew it, most of it was gone. Yang Yuding got up to throw the trash into the bin. As soon as she left, Liu Yu leaned in and asked, "You and Su got close pretty fast, huh?" "Yeah, pretty fast. Thanks to Su Qinglu. With his absolutely horrible personality, he instantly broke the years of distance between us. It made me recall all the times he messed with me when we were kids. Now, whenever I see Su Qingru, I get annoyed. I just want to argue with him." While ranting in my head, I waited for Liu Yu to yawn, then quickly stuffed a bag of spicy strips into my pocket. Liu Yu didn't even notice my sneaky move. He was about to ask a few more questions, but Yang Yuding had already run back. So I spoke up. "It's about time." We should head back. Yang Yuding checked her watch. It's still break time. There are 15 minutes left. I need to use the restroom. Alright then, I should get going too. Yang Yuding said, I'll come find you guys later. Bye-bye. Liu Yu and I waved at her. Once she left, I nudged Liu Yu's arm. You go ahead. I'm heading to the field restroom. Liu Yu looked puzzled. You seriously need to use the restroom? I thought you were making an excuse. I froze, thinking he had seen me. Sneak a pack of spicy strips. I widened my eyes, trying to stay calm. Why would I make up an excuse? Liu Yu also felt nervous, thinking I had figured something out. So in the end, neither of us noticed the other's guilt. Nothing. I'm heading off then. Watch the time. Don't be late. Both of us had our own hidden thoughts. After parting ways, I eagerly found a secluded spot and took a bite of the spicy strips. Liu Yu thought to himself, I'm never impulsively helping someone play matchmaker again. This guy is way too clueless. The spicy strips were from Liu Yu. I had never tried them before, so the first bite was so spicy that I spat it out. I coughed multiple times. This is way too spicy. How does Liu Yu eat to packs? Without even flinching? My whole face scrunched up from the heat. I kept coughing from the spiciness. I had let Liu Yu take all the other drinks. The milk tea was finished and thrown away. I stood there for a while, but my mouth was still burning. So I decided to go buy a bottle of water. I reached into my pocket, no money. I felt completely defeated. I thought about heading to the convenience store entrance, hoping to run into someone I knew. Maybe I could borrow 2 yuan from them. As I stepped out from behind the tree, I had only taken a few steps when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the small stage nearby. That back view wasn't that Sukingru. I didn't expect such a coincidence. Just as I was about to call out to her, a thought suddenly struck me. I came to this secluded spot alone, to secretly eat spicy strips. So, what was Sukingru doing here alone? What was she secretly up to? Maybe I could catch her doing something embarrassing. So I tiptoed around to the front of the stage, then suddenly jumped out in front of her. Sukingru visibly flinched, then reacted instantly. With lightning speed, she snatched something from her lips and hid it behind her back. She moved so fast that all I saw was a white blur. But because of that motion, I immediately noticed what had been in her mouth, a white, stick-like object, clenched between her lips. She obviously didn't want me to see it. What could it be? Sukingru was smoking. The moment I reached that conclusion, I felt completely stunned. I stood there awkwardly. I hadn't expected this outcome. I had indeed caught her red-handed, but this wasn't the kind of dirt I wanted. At that moment, Sukingru spoke in a slightly hoarse voice. What are you doing here? I stammered, then hesitated. After thinking for a second, I blurted out, I came to use the restroom. Bullshit. Sukingru smirked, a playful glint in her eyes. Are you stalking your dear sister Kingru? Seeing her reaction, I was even more certain she was smoking. I felt conflicted, ignoring her nonsense. I simply said, I won't tell anyone. Sukingru's movements paused for a moment. The smile at the corner of her lips faded. Her tone became slightly unnatural. Who cares if you tell or not? Her right hand still stubbornly remained behind her back. As if I hadn't noticed, I said, the school rules clearly prohibit. But I hesitated and didn't finish the sentence. Instead, I continued in a serious tone, if you get caught, the consequences will be severe. It could affect your future in all aspects. Your grades are so good, you might even have a guaranteed university recommendation in senior year. Sukingru seemed to be holding back laughter. Her voice turned playful and strange. You sure think highly of me? I responded with a blank face. Only in terms of academics. Sukingru smirked. I have a great personality too. She was trying to change the subject again. I clenched my fist in frustration. Can you take this seriously? If I didn't already know you from before, I wouldn't even care. Your guaranteed admission is your own business. What does it have to do with me? Hearing that, Sukingru lowered her head. Her shoulders and chest trembled slightly. I hesitated, thinking to myself, there's no way this weirdo is actually this fragile, right? Did I really just scold her into tears? I suddenly felt at a loss. Sukingru, don't be like this. I already said I won't tell anyone. As I spoke, I stepped closer, trying to see her expression. But suddenly, Sukingru lifted her head with a completely relaxed smile. Her lips were red, her teeth white. Absolutely stunning. The sunlight made her shine even more brilliantly. My heart skipped a beat for a few seconds. I stared at her without blinking. Sukingru laughed openly and freely, her whole body shaking with amusement. Suddenly, she leaned in closer. Our faces were incredibly close. Her eyes twinkled as she smirked. Do you think I'm that stupid? Smoking. On the school field. I froze. If not that, then what else could it be? Slowly, I snapped back to my senses. Only then did I realize how close we were. So I took a step back. Sukingru noticed. She didn't say anything, just brought her right hand forward and popped something into her mouth. It was like she had laughed enough. Her whole demeanor had relaxed into a lazy, carefree air. Between her lips was a white paper stick. But it didn't stop her from speaking. That familiar playful, teasing tone. Charming, yet utterly shameless. A tone that belonged uniquely to Sukingru. Zhao Chenshin, is a lollipop a major school violation too? What article of the school rules is that? When I finally realized what she was actually holding in her mouth, my whole face burned with embarrassment. I was both angry and mortified. I couldn't even find the words to speak. I just wanted to turn and leave, but a hand reached out and grabbed me. Don't go. Sukingru coaxed softly. Her voice was unusually gentle. The next second, she stuffed something into my hand. I looked down and heard her let out a teasing chuckle. Sister Kingru has another lollipop here. I paused for 2 seconds. She started suppressing laughter again. If you take it, you won't tell on me, right? I still want my recommendation. I gripped the lollipop in my hand, completely infuriated. Sukingru burst into laughter. Her laughter was so genuine, so unrestrained, that it echoed across the school field. And for some reason, it was contagious. Stop laughing. I tried to keep a straight face. I glared at her. But not even 5 seconds later, I suddenly let out a chuckle too, and started laughing with her, clutching the lollipop tightly in my hand. Both amused and frustrated, Sukingru actually came all the way to the field just to eat a lollipop in secret. A top overseas student like Sukingru. And yet, she was just like me, sneaking to the playground to eat junk food. I completely lost my composure. I followed him and burst into laughter. The two of us were laughing heartily. Suddenly, a cheerful bell rang throughout the school building. Its lingering echo spread across the playground. My smile froze. Oh no. I forgot about class. I panicked and glared at Sukingru. You're still laughing. Hurry up and run. The next teacher is really strict. What's there to be afraid of? Sukingru gradually stopped laughing. She shot me a meaningful glance. Report. The chemistry teacher, who was in the middle of class, turned and looked at the door. Why are you just so late? I remained calm. The new student had to complete the school transfer procedures. Mr. Zhao was busy, so I took him around to different offices for signatures. Sukingru stood behind me, holding a few documents, letting the chemistry teacher inspect them. As expected, the teacher said nothing. Come in. The two of us obediently returned to our seats, ignoring the subtle, curious glances from our classmates, pretending not to notice. The excuse was Sukingru's idea. The class representative, provided the explanation, and the official-looking papers were just recharged slips. A perfectly coordinated plan. In the entire class, only Liu Yu was staring in disbelief, watching us calmly return to our seats, his mind filled with questions. How did they come back together? What were they doing? Something's off about those two. And so, for the entire class, Liu Yu kept staring at the backs of our heads, glancing at least 50 times. Even the chemistry teacher couldn't help but ask, You there, in the last row? Did you strain your neck or something? Liu Yu awkwardly nodded. My chemistry isn't great, but at least I'm not busy questioning other people. I was helping Liu Yu with the problems he didn't understand. In between, I also made a trip to the office to pick up the Chinese homework. Then I distributed it to the class, busy like a spinning top. The last self-study session allowed free questioning. Only 5 minutes left before school ended, and I was still looking around the class, trying to find someone to teach me. Sukingru couldn't stand watching anymore. She tapped her knuckles against my desk and said, If you keep asking others, they might be busy too. Besides, the time you spend walking around is enough to go through several steps. I nodded in agreement. That was actually true. Sukingru tapped the table again. Why don't you just ask your desk mate? I think I look pretty much like a top student. I pursed my lips. Suddenly, I remembered Sukingru's perfect math score. A full score. I had never seen a perfect score before. Even though in this monthly exam, Su Qingru only took 3 subjects, and her scores weren't recorded in the system, but with her math being that good, there was no way her other science subjects were bad. But somehow, I felt like she had ulterior motives. I rolled my eyes. You're just annoyed that I keep walking in and out, right? Su Qingru didn't deny it. She casually waved 3 slender fingers and lazily said, 3 yuan per question. I continued, but at least let me try a sample lesson. Even tutoring centers give free trial lessons. But Su Qingru replied slowly. I changed my mind. I froze. I turned to glare at her. Are you messing with me again? Su Qinglu remained unbothered. What I said just now was messing with you. Hearing that, I got even angrier. She admitted it so confidently. I was about to argue back, but suddenly realized what she meant. If I changed my mind, was messing with me, then that meant she actually wanted to tutor me. At this moment, Su Qingru spoke again. What I said earlier about charging 3 yuan per question was just a joke. I was getting dizzy from his words. I looked at him speechlessly. Speak normally. Su Qingru tilted his head. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. Once again, he used that slow, lazy tone with no seriousness. How could an elder sister charge her younger brother for tutoring? Isn't this just natural? After saying that, he directly grabbed the chemistry test paper from my desk. Hearing this, my heart skipped a beat. The shift in attitude was too sudden. I let out a long breath I had been holding. I felt my ears getting a bit hot. I calmed my racing heartbeat, trying my best not to let this little devil beside me notice anything. Jokes aside, Su Qingru still took the time during the break to thoroughly explain the 2 chemistry problems to me. The afternoon passed quickly. It was now the last class. It was another self-study session. I rubbed the skin under my eyes, then twisted the cap off my bottle and took a sip of water. I went back to reviewing my physics paper. When I got to the last problem, I suddenly didn't understand it. I flipped through the book but still couldn't recall the concept, so I tugged at Su Qingru's sleeve. The classroom was very quiet. To avoid disturbing others, we had to lean in close to talk. So I moved closer to Su Qingru and asked, Su, can you explain this question to me again? At first, seeing his ridiculously good-looking face up close, I stiffened completely. But soon, I forced myself to focus on the question, finally regaining my composure. Yet, at this moment, I was once again flustered. Su Qingru, however, seemed completely unfazed. He let me stare as much as I wanted, lowering his voice to explain. This part of the problem steps. You wrote the front side. I told you. You'd forget. Su Qingru waited for a response. When he didn't get one, he looked up at me. My face was slightly red. Seeing him staring at me, a trace of panic flashed in my eyes. Su Qingru paused for a moment. He held his pen and lightly pointed in the air below my left eye. You're really red here. Feeling guilty, I blurted out. You're the one who's red. Su Qingru chuckled. And now your whole face is red. Looking at his incredibly handsome face, I said, can you get plastic surgery? Talking to you face to face like this, it's really a test of my self-control. No way. Su Qingru set down his pen, smiling. If I changed my face, how could I still tease you? I shut my eyes, taking a deep breath. I tried my best to cool the heat on my face. Heaven and earth can bear witness. This face should be illegal. I reached up and rubbed the skin under my eye again. Only then did I suddenly realize the spot Su Qingru pointed at earlier was actually where a mosquito had bitten me. Of course, it was red. I was overthinking things. The heat I had just suppressed started to rise again. That patch of skin on my face really itched, but I didn't dare scratch it. Afraid of breaking the skin, I just pressed it with my fingertip. Seeing me like this, Su Qingru's expression gradually became serious. He tapped his own chin, gesturing toward me. You're red here too. Then, he leaned in even closer, carefully examining my entire face, and my cheeks, too. He suddenly stopped, sighing. Then he ordered, go to the infirmary. I touched the areas he mentioned. Maybe it was just in my head, but it really did feel a bit itchy. Isn't it just a mosquito bite? Mosquitoes are really vicious these days. Then, suddenly, I remembered the bite of spicy strips I had this morning. My voice grew quieter. Su Qingru caught on immediately. He stared at me expressionlessly. What did you just remember? I couldn't let anyone know the real reason, so I made up a lie. Maybe it's a pollen allergy. Su Qingru's expression showed utter disbelief. he muttered. But his hands were already packing up his things. Wow, that must be one beautiful flower. Hearing this, I felt a bit indignant. Prettier than you. Sukingru raised an eyebrow. Then why am I not allergic? After tidying his desk, Sukingru was about to stand up. Quickly, I grabbed his arm and pushed him back down, forcing him to stay. We made quite a bit of noise. Some of our classmates turned to look at us. I lowered my voice. What are you doing? Your face is already starting to swell. Sukingru looked at my shocked expression with satisfaction, shamelessly continuing his nonsense. Don't you feel your cheeks getting itchier? It's even redder than before. I glanced at the window's reflection, hesitating. But class is almost over. How about I go after school? There are still 15 minutes left. Sukingru stared at me calmly. Do you really want to walk out of here looking like a swollen pig? Fine. I was convinced. I started packing my bag. Let me grab my stuff. Then I'll tell the class monitor. Just as I finished speaking, Sukingru was already standing up, under the confused gazes of our classmates. He walked toward the class monitor expressionlessly. He bent down and whispered a few words. I couldn't stop him at all. I could only watch as the class monitor glanced briefly in my direction, then nodded. Sukingru turned and shot me a look, giving me an okay gesture. Then, he walked out. I knew he was waiting outside the classroom for me, so I sped up packing my bag. Soon, under everyone's curious gazes, I left too. We arrived at the infirmary. I followed behind Sukingru. As soon as we walked in, the school doctor chuckled. Grinning, he asked, "What kind of allergy is this?" Sukingru replied, "It seems to be pollen." The school doctor shook his head firmly. Nonsense. Pollen allergies don't look like this. Sukingru shot me a sharp look. His eyes showed no emotion. I suddenly felt weak. But then I refused to accept it. Why should I be afraid of Sukingru? So I straightened my back and told the doctor, "Spicy strips." The first word was clear and loud. The second word was so weak it was barely audible. I muttered under my breath. I only took one bite. And I spit it out right away. All right, fine. I was afraid he'd tell my parents, because my parents knew I was allergic to spicy strips. Since I had already admitted it, I figured I might as well go all in. I still have some leftover ointment from last time. Can I just use this? I unzipped my backpack, pulled out the ointment, and placed it on the counter in front of the doctor. Sukingru glanced over again. His lips pressed into a firm line. He didn't say anything or make any other moves. Then the doctor picked up the ointment and checked the ingredients list. He gestured for me to come closer and put on gloves. Carefully, he examined my face. Then he nodded. It's fine. I'll prescribe you some additional medicine. Your face is so red. It looks like you have more than one type of allergy. I suggest you go to the hospital and get an allergy test when you have time. How do you get to different allergies just from one spicy strip? He chuckled, teasing me. Then he turned to prepare the medicine. I sneaked a glance at Sukingru and found that he was already staring at me. His expression was not friendly. Once the ointment was ready, Sukingru returned to his usual indifferent expression. But his eyes were not smiling. Slowly, he asked, "You knew you were allergic to spicy strips, didn't you?" It sounded like a question, but his tone was more like a statement. I was completely terrified. I was afraid that in a moment of impulse, he would go tell my mom. So I softened my tone and admitted, "Was I wrong?" Sukingru didn't expect me to admit it so easily and laughed. Then, as if addicted, he ruffled my hair again. "As long as you know you were wrong, go wash your face. I'll take you home." He really knew how to phrase things. I pouted and gave him a strange look. You take the same road home anyway. But as soon as he mentioned home, I got nervous again. My shoulders slumped. I looked at Sukingru, who was standing at the door, with pleading eyes. "Can you not tell my parents?" Sukingru chuckled softly. He crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Do I even need to? Your face is so red, they'll see it from 10 meters away. Not that, I know I can't hide it from Neruda. I mean the reason for the allergy. My mom is already mad at me because of my grades. If she finds out I secretly ate spicy strips and messed up my face like this." I didn't even finish my sentence. I looked at Sukingru. He seemed to be thinking, remaining silent. I quickly added, "If you keep quiet, I can pay you." Pay him? Do I look like a gangster, or do I look like someone desperate for money? Sukingru was both amused and exasperated. I thought about it again, so I changed the offer to something material. "Then I'll treat you to a meal." But afraid he might say something like, Do I look like I'm starving? I quickly added. Think of it as owing you a favor. If you ever need something, I can help you out. Sukingru blinked, saying nothing, but he looked a little tempted. Suddenly, I started regretting it. Did I just say too much? So I quickly added a condition. It has to be something I can actually do. Nothing illegal or against personal morals. Nothing that breaks social norms or puts me in a tough spot. You sure have a lot of conditions. Sukingru laughed softly. I muttered under my breath. It's not like you'd actually make me commit murder or arson. Let's go. Sukingru handed me a mask he had bought outside earlier. For pollen-allergic student Yichen. After school, Sukingru walked home with me. As expected, when my mom saw my bright red face, even the mask couldn't hide it. She immediately started scolding me. My dad stopped her. Even Kingru was there. Let them come inside first. Yichen, what happened to your face? I didn't dare to speak. I glanced at Sukingru. Sukingru smoothly replied. He sniffed a bouquet of flowers when he went with me to the office, and then he had a pollen allergy. He even threw in the name of a flower I had never heard before. Anyway, with how calm and composed Sukingru looked, and how regretful he sounded, even I started to believe him. Then Sukingru handed over my medication, explaining the dosage to my dad, how to use it, and the precautions. My dad noted everything down. Meanwhile, I stood there like a baby who couldn't speak, obediently letting them take care of me in the background. Suddenly, my mom interrupted, looking at me. Why aren't you speaking for yourself? Did you lose your mouth? How have I raised you all this time? My dad nudged her, slightly reproachful. What are you saying? Look at the state the kid is in. I was already used to standing quietly on the side, but I still felt a little embarrassed, especially in front of Sukingru. At that moment, Sukingru spoke again. Uncle Annie, the responsibility is mainly mine. Yichen was just leading the way from me when he accompanied me to the office. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had an allergic reaction. With an outsider present, my mom held back. Even her frustration over my exam scores was temporarily set aside. After chatting for a while, my dad accompanied me to wash my face and apply the medicine. Meanwhile, my mom walked Sukingru out. The next day, I went to school wearing a mask. I didn't take off my mask during class. Over the past few days, my mom started feeling sorry for my face. Gradually, her anger subsided. She only laid down one rule. Next time, I must rank in the top 100 of my grade. Otherwise, she hired a tutor. Friday came again. Liu came over holding several amusement park tickets. He asked if I wanted to go. I was buried in chemical equations and didn't even look up. No, I need to make it back into the top 100 next month. Otherwise, my mom will hire a tutor. After saying that, I glanced around. Liu leaned in closer. Lowering his voice, he whispered, I invited your goddess. Liu cupped his face and grinned. She already agreed to go, but he was afraid it'd be too awkward with just the two of us. So he asked me to bring a few more people. I knew it. There was no way this guy would invite me for no reason. So I asked him, aren't you afraid I'll be the one feeling awkward? Just then, Sukingru returned. Liu quickly moved aside to give him his seat. Standing in the aisle, he continued, I also invited Yang Yuding. You won't feel awkward. Hearing this, the corners of Sukingru's lips curved slightly. An interesting thought flashed through his mind. Suddenly, he straightened up and looked at me. Friday came again. Liu came over holding several amusement park tickets. He asked if I wanted to go. I was buried in chemical equations and didn't even look up. No, I need to make it back into the top 100 next month. Otherwise, my mom will hire a tutor. After saying that, I glanced around. Liu leaned in closer. Lowering his voice, he whispered, I invited your goddess. Liu cupped his face and grinned. She already agreed to go, but he was afraid it'd be too awkward with just the two of us. So he asked me to bring a few more people. I knew it. There was no way this guy would invite me for no reason. So I asked him, aren't you afraid I'll be the one feeling awkward? Just then, Sukingru returned. Liu quickly moved aside to give him his seat. Standing in the aisle, he continued, I also invited Yang Yuding. You won't feel awkward. Hearing this, the corners of Sukingru's lips curved slightly. An interesting thought flashed through his mind. Suddenly, he straightened up and looked at me. I didn't notice his expression. I looked at Liu and asked, isn't Yang Yuding in temporary training? Liu replied, she has the day off that day. I lowered my head, continuing to work on my assignment. I don't have the day off. Liu pleaded desperately, come on, big bro. Do me this favor. Help me fulfill my love story. Hearing this, I waved him off. If I help you, who's going to help me get into the top 100? Liu kept asking. Are you really planning to study all day Saturday and Sunday? I nodded seriously. Saturday homework, Sunday practice exams. Liu quickly adjusted my schedule. Okay, Friday afternoon and Saturday morning homework. Saturday afternoon you come with me to the amusement park. Sunday you do your practice exams. I thought about it seriously. Actually, that wasn't a bad plan. So I reluctantly made a small concession. I lifted my eyelids slightly and asked, how many tickets do you have? Liu grinned and answered, 6. I pondered for a moment, then find a few more people. Just me and Yang Yuding would be kind of awkward. Liu nodded. Then I'll invite Kezin. Kezin was a guy from class to next door. We were in the same class during middle school. We got along pretty well. Liu looked at the last ticket in his left hand. Who should I give the last one to? Sigh. Most of my old friends and I don't talk much anymore. Should we just leave it with Kezin? I gave a half-hearted As long as I don't have to be alone with Yang Yuding. It'd be too easy to cause misunderstandings. If the ticket won't be used, just sell it. At that moment, Su Qingru suddenly sat up straight and leaned toward Liu. He looked genuinely interested. Can I have that ticket? Hearing that, my hand paused as I was copying equations. Liu was caught off guard and met his gaze. Mesmerized by that stunning face, he stupidly grinned. His brain short-circuited, and he agreed without thinking, sure. Then, very eagerly, he handed over the ticket. Su Qingru smiled and said, thanks. Liu almost forgot to breathe. I scoffed at his reaction, pathetic. I waved Liu off. Go back to your seat. Class is about to start. Liu walked off in a daze, but it was clear he still hadn't snapped out of it. I put my pen down, looking at the ticket in Su Qingru's hand. I couldn't help but ask, do you even like amusement parks? Su Qingru glanced at the ticket in his hand, then lazily replied, they're okay. Since coming back, aside from the airport, train station, school, and home, I haven't gone anywhere. So, I want to go out, see what the country looks like now. That reason was convincing. I nodded. The city has changed a lot over the years. You should definitely check it out. Su Qingru glanced at me. Something suddenly came to mind. He asked, in our class, CHU Shen Yao and CHU. He suddenly paused as if he couldn't remember. I looked at him and gave a hint. It's CHU Meng Yao. Su Qingru lazily nodded. Are they sisters? I continued, no. They just have similar names. They're not related. Su Qingru smiled slightly. His gaze shifted as if recalling something. They do look quite alike. I glanced at him in disbelief. Then I turned back to my workbook with a complicated expression. I held back my urge to argue, but in the end, I couldn't hold it in. I turned my head and sincerely said, how about I take you to see Senior CHU Meng Yao during break? You might be mistaking her for someone else. Su Qingru asked calmly. Are you close with Senior CHU Meng Yao? I nodded. Yeah, pretty close. She tutored me in humanities subjects. Su Qingru looked at me and continued asking, was she your tutor? I waved my hand. Not really. Then I thought about it and figured there was no need to explain too much. So I simply said, she's just a senior I have a good relationship with. Su Qingru snorted lightly. Then why didn't she tutor you in science subjects? She's a humanities student, I answered, then realized something. I glanced at him suspiciously. Why are you so interested in her? Su Qingru's tone was indifferent. Just curious. Am I not allowed to gossip a little? I was shocked. It was as if I was looking at a completely different Su Qingru. I stared at him and said, that's unexpected. I swallowed hard. I never saw this side of you. I looked him up and down again. An absurd but somewhat reasonable thought crossed my mind, but before I could say it, Su Qingru smirked. He glanced at me with a teasing expression, as if he had read my mind. He cut me off before I could speak. You should understand what disaster comes from the mouth means, right? I silently stopped speaking, and continued to bury my head in writing equations without saying a word. During the next class break, Liu came over again. He said Kezin had something to do over the weekend and couldn't go. He asked me and Su Qingru if just the 5 of us would be okay. Su Qingru waved his hand and said, I have no objections. I thought for a moment and said, I have no problem either. Great, Liu checked the time on the tickets. Then let's meet at 3 p.m. at the amusement park entrance. And just like that, The plan was set. On Saturday afternoon, Su-King-gru washed his hair. After drying it with a hairdryer, he braided it into two pigtails. They hung obediently on either side of his ears. Then he started choosing an outfit. Going to an amusement park. Who knows what kind of running and jumping activities there might be. Wearing a short skirt might be inconvenient. Jeans would be more suitable. But would jeans be too plain? This was a rare chance not to wear a school uniform. Su-King-gru's gaze lingered between the wardrobe with skirts and the one with pants for a long time. In the end, he chose a long white dress first. For this season, a thin layer was just right. Meanwhile, I had already gotten ready to go out. At that moment, I felt a bit conflicted. Even though we were neighbors and desk mates, Su-King-gru and I hadn't actually discussed whether to go together. I didn't bring it up, thinking Su-King-gru would mention it first. But he never did. Now, going over to knock on his door felt a little awkward. So I stood at my door, glancing at the villa next door for a few minutes. Then I withdrew my gaze and walked toward the residential exit. The amusement park could be reached directly by bus. And there was a bus stop right outside the community. I stood at the bus stop, waiting for the bus to arrive. Not even 5 minutes passed before another figure appeared beside me. Their shadow happened to fall on me. I turned my head slightly to look. My gaze landed on Su-King-gru. Dressed in a white long dress, he looked absolutely stunning. His beautiful big eyes were staring right at me. I felt inexplicably nervous under his gaze. I wanted to find something reflective to check my appearance. At that moment, a voice as sweet as silver bells rang out. "Handsome guy, you're dressed so nicely today." To hear such a direct compliment from Su-King-gru left me momentarily stunned. A warmth crept up from behind my ears. Su-King-gru leisurely continued, rushing off to a blind date. I glared at him. Blind date, my foot. Su-King-gru didn't say anything. Instead, he moved a little closer. He tugged at the corner of my shirt. In a teasing tone, he asked, "Handsome guy, do you have a girlfriend?" I looked up at him. Unable to hold back, I asked, "Can you stop teasing me every day?" Su-King-gru let go of my shirt. He laughed to himself, looking completely amused. Just then, the bus arrived. I stomped onto the bus in frustration and dropped my fare into the box. It wasn't rush hour, so there were only a few passengers scattered around. I found a single seat and sat down. After waiting a bit, I realized Su-King-gru still hadn't come over. I glanced back, just in time to see Su-King-gru gripping a handrail with one hand and holding a British pound note in the other. The driver and he exchanged awkward looks. Su-King-gru chuckled awkwardly. Seeing this, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over, grabbed the pound note, and inserted a coin into the fare box myself. Then, I returned to my seat. Su-King-gru followed behind me. He sat in the seat directly behind me. The bus started moving. I kept staring out the window, watching the scenery outside change. As we passed a certain road, cherry blossoms drifted down with the wind. The entire world seemed to be painted pink. I took out my phone and snapped several pictures. As I was selecting the best one, I suddenly noticed some of the pictures had two extra fingers in the upper left corner. They looked completely out of place. I turned around to look back. Sure enough, I saw Su-King-gru making a peace sign. He tilted his head and looked at me. I gave him an exasperated look. "What are you doing?" Su-King-gru moved his peace sign next to his face. His lips curled up into a smile. "Aren't you going to take a picture of me back?" He was referring to the time I took a candid photo of him on the Cherry Blossom Avenue. I had almost forgotten about that incident. I reached out my hand and asked, "Where's your phone?" "Hand it over. Let me see. I want to check how the candid shot turned out." I had a feeling it wouldn't look great. Su-King-gru calmly said, "I didn't bring it." I was in disbelief. "You went out without your phone?" Su-King-gru nodded. His tone carried a hint of reprimand. Who takes their phone when going out to have fun? Su-King-gru had been holding his peace sign for a while. Seeing that I had no intention of taking a picture, he reminded me, "I'm giving you a chance. Hope you cherish it." What chance? I was momentarily confused. Su-King-gru smiled at me. A chance to take a candid shot of me. I hesitated for a few seconds, barely holding back a retort. Looking at him making a peace sign, he did look pretty stunning. But how was this a candid shot? Still, faced with such temptation, I ended up raising my phone. Just as I was about to press the shutter, The person in the frame suddenly smiled at me. Lips red, teeth white, absolutely stunning. But my hand trembled. I ended up blurring the shot. I steadied my hands. Pressed the shutter once again. This time, it came out well. I glanced at it. Couldn't help but take another look. Then another. Sukingru rested his arm on the back of my seat. He leaned over to look at my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I quickly pressed the power button, leaving only a black screen. If you want to see, send me the pictures you took of me first. Sukingru heard this and said, never mind then. I threatened him. Aren't you afraid I made you look ugly in the picture? No, Sukingru replied without hesitation. That made me pause. Why? Sukingru lifted his eyelids. Smirking. Because you just stared at my picture. For a full 3 times. Your eyesight is pretty good, huh? I turned my head away in exasperation, deciding to ignore him for the rest of the ride. Sukingru patted my shoulder. Don't be shy. I made up my mind. I wouldn't talk to him until we got off the bus. But Sukingru seemed to be having too much fun. He kept tugging at my clothes, here and there. Zhao Chencheng being shy is only natural. I let out a deep breath, leaning forward a bit. So he couldn't reach me. If possible, I wanted to plug my ears. Or maybe just tie Sukingru's mouth shut. Our home wasn't far from the amusement park. The bus arrived quickly. As soon as the announcement sounded, I hurried off the bus. Sukingru followed me down. I glanced at him. Determined to keep my promise, I started talking to him the moment we stepped off. Can I ask you a question? Why did you always wear a hat before? Once, when passing by to girls after class, I overheard them discussing this. One of them asked, why does Sukingru from the next class always wear a hat to school? The other girl rolled her eyes, trying to act cool, obviously. Sukingru seemed surprised that I asked this. He glanced at me with a lazy look. Seeing that expression, I knew whatever he was about to say wouldn't be serious. Sukingru's voice was calm. Too many people were secretly staring at me, so I had to cover up a bit. I replied speechlessly. People looking at you doesn't cost you anything. Sukingru glanced at me, then suddenly laughed. Are you standing up for them now? Hey, Zhao Chencheng, you're not one of them too, are you? Hearing him call me Zhao Chencheng, I shivered. Goosebumps spread all over my body. I turned around and walked straight towards the amusement park. I decided not to speak to this narcissist until we arrived at the park. Sukingru followed leisurely behind me, keeping a 3-step distance. Are you mad? I was just joking. I ignored him. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. Sukingru put away his playful tone and spoke in a more serious voice. He said to himself, wearing a hat was a habit I picked up in the UK. The weather there was really annoying. Rain and strong winds were an everyday thing. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but after catching the flu a few times, I started wrapping up properly. I listened carefully. I couldn't help but say, but you don't need it anymore, right? Our weather is mild, and the air quality is pretty good too. Sukingru chuckled and said, exactly. That's why I'm not wearing one now. I didn't turn back, but I could hear the change in his voice. He sounded quite happy. We walked for a while longer, until we were finally walking side by side. Liu Yu arrived early. He stood at the entrance of the amusement park. From a distance, he spotted the two of us. He waved in our direction. I waved back at him. I ran up and looked around, asking, the other two aren't here yet. Liu Yu greeted Sukingru, then nodded. Hanshin lives far away. They should be here soon. Yang Yuding just went nearby. I patted his shoulder. How come Hanshin made you wait? Liu Yu checked his watch. He chuckled foolishly. Instinctively, he defended her. We just came early. It's not even the agreed time yet. I gave him a disapproving look. Who said girls who aren't punctual aren't sincere? Liu Yu muttered. That's different. You were talking about girls who like guys. But in my case, I like her. But she probably doesn't like me as much as I like her. So, I'll wait. I gave him a thumbs up. Sukingru stood beside us, looking thoughtful. After Liu Yu finished speaking, he looked me up and down. Yichen, you look really handsome today. Your school uniform usually hides at least half of your looks. I grinned. You look pretty good yourself. As we were talking, someone shouted from a distance. Jiang Yichen. Liu Yu turned around. It was Yang Yuding, standing across the street. She was carrying a large plastic bag in one hand. She waved at us. Su Qingru glanced up at her, then quickly looked away. Yang Yuding scanned the group. When she saw Su Qingru, she paused. She rubbed her eyes. As she crossed the street, she kept glancing at Su Qingru. Her expression was a mix of surprise and curiosity. Su Qingru lazily met her gaze. His lips curled slightly. He even smiled at her. It was 3 p.m. The sun was at its peak. Yang Yuding jogged over. A light sheen of sweat covered her forehead. I happened to have tissues. I handed her two. She smiled at me. Thanks. She opened the plastic bag. She took out 2 cups of fruit tea from the ice. She looked at the labels, then handed them to Jiang Yichen and Liu Yu. Liu Yu exclaimed, "Wow. Yang Yuding, are you Doraemon?" Yang Yuding responded, "Here's your mango sago." "And yours?" I interrupted her. "Thanks," I said. I hadn't forgotten that Su Qingru was still next to me. That guy never missed a chance to tease me. Yang Yuding then took out another drink from the ice. She reached out and handed it to Su Qingru. Her expression looked slightly complicated. "Here, classmate, for you." I didn't know what everyone liked, so I just bought the standard lemon water. Liu Yu stood next to us, chewing on his straw, turning away. He couldn't bear to watch. Honestly, it was his fault. The way Su Qingru tilted his head to ask for the ticket. It was just as stunning. He got caught up and handed over the ticket, completely forgetting that Yang Yuding was also in the group. By the time he remembered, he specifically told Yang Yuding about it, which only made it seem like Su Qingru and Jiang Yichen had something going on. He didn't want Yang Yuding to overthink it, but he couldn't exactly take the ticket back from Su Qingru. Liu Yu lowered his head, playing dumb. He thought to himself. Yang Yuding said if Jiang Yichen was going, she'd go. She didn't care about the rest of the group, but Su Qingru and Jiang Yichen. There's really nothing between them, right? He had just seen Su Qingru give Yang Yuding a friendly smile. Other than Jiang Yichen, who was completely clueless. Everyone else could tell that Yang Yuding, like Jiang Yichen, a guy wouldn't smile at his rival in love. Su Qingru gave a polite smile, but he didn't take the lemon water from Yang Yuding. "Sorry," he said. "You guys can drink it. I'm allergic to lemon." I hadn't even opened my fruit tea yet. I froze. "You're allergic to lemon?" Su Qingru glanced at me and calmly nodded. "That's right." I laughed. "So you have food allergies too?" "That's great." Everyone looked at me. I slowly pressed my lips into a straight line, as if trying to make up for my mistake. I took the initiative to offer my fruit tea. "Let's switch. You drink mine. I haven't started drinking it yet." "Babeofen." Su Qingru pronounced each syllable slowly. A sly smile flashed in his eyes. Before I could react, he reached out to take it. But Yang Yuding suddenly interrupted. Before Su Qingru and I could finish the exchange. Everyone turned to look at her. Yang Yuding forced a smile. She explained, "Yichen, your drink is pretty bitter. Most girls don't like that. Let's switch. My drink has lots of sugar. It's really sweet." She took the last cup of milk tea from her bag and handed it to me. She quickly pulled her own cup back, accepting the exchange in an instant. Afraid that Su Qingru would refuse, I quickly punctured the lid and took a sip from the straw. Su Qingru smirked and gave me a sideways glance. He let out a soft hum, then accepted the milk tea from Yang Yuding. He smiled and thanked her. Just then Han Shen arrived. He was sweating profusely, panting as he explained there was traffic. "So, I ran here. Sorry for being late." "My bad." Liu Yu quickly reassured him. "It's fine. We're not in a rush. You could have just texted me. Take your time next time. I'll get you some tissues." He turned to me. "Yichen, give me some tissues." I pulled out a few tissues and handed them to Liu Yu. Liu Yu then gave them to Han Shen. Yang Yuding also shared her milk tea with Han Shen. The three of them weren't that familiar with each other. Liu Yu took the initiative to introduce. "You already know Jiang Yichen. This is his childhood friend, and also his desk mate, Su King-gru. This is Yang Yuding. She was in the same middle school class as Yichen and me. Yang Yuding looked quite surprised. She glanced at Su King-gru. Liu Yu, feeling guilty, quickly added another explanation. Su King-gru just returned to the country. He's not too familiar with our city yet. The three girls exchanged greetings. Then everyone walked together into the amusement park. It was Sunday, and the park was quite crowded. This amusement park was newly opened. It had many different attractions. Liu Yu stood in front of a huge signboard. He studied the dazzling array of directions. Then he turned to ask us, "Where should we go first? You guys pick." Liu Yu shrugged. "Yichen, you choose first." I glanced around and pointed straight at the carousel in the center. Then I heard a chuckle beside me. It sounded like someone failed to hold back a laugh. I gritted my teeth. I didn't even need to look to know who it was. So, I quickly raised my hand a little higher and pointed to the icon above the carousel. Silence suddenly filled the air. Liu Yu hesitated. "Are you sure?" I nodded as I looked at what I had just pointed at. It was a Halloween pumpkin, with four big words next to it: Haunted House Horror. Jiang Yichen. Su King-gru found my expression amusing. He copied Liu Yu and asked, "Are you sure?" If anyone else had asked me again, I would have immediately chosen another attraction, but it was Su King-gru. Of all people, it had to be Su King-gru. I clenched my teeth and nodded. "This one." Su King-gru smiled as he looked at me. Han Xinyi also agreed. Liu Yu thought for a moment. A haunted house in a dark, eerie environment. It's the perfect place for couples in the ambiguous phase. So, he nodded along as well. Only Yang Yuding was left. I looked at her. "What about you?" Yang Yuding gave me a strange look, then nodded hesitantly. I nodded back, pointing to a path. "Let's go this way." To avoid boredom, I started some small talk. "Liu Yu, how many times have you been to a haunted house before?" 3 or 4 times, I think, Liu Yu recalled. But they were all small ones, not very scary. This amusement park has a lot of attractions, so the haunted house shouldn't be too big either. Probably, I nodded. Small ones aren't scary. After all, they can't fit many props inside. Han Xinyi added, "I went to one before. A medium-sized one. It was a mental hospital theme. The entire haunted house was designed like a hospital. There were even some tombs in the backyard. It felt eerily real." I glanced at Su King-gru, who was lazily walking on the far side. He seemed a little out of place. Since I was the one who knew him best, I decided to take responsibility for keeping him involved. Walking over, I asked, "What about you? Have you ever been to a haunted house in the UK? Was it scary?" Su King-gru lowered his gaze at me. Then he shook his head. "No. No time." I asked again, "Were you very busy?" Su King-gru seemed to know what I was thinking. His eyes curved into a smile. For once, he didn't tease me. "Not really. School kept me occupied. The wind there was strong. Going out wasn't very convenient. I didn't go out much. But once, our school trip took us to a place where a cemetery was just 10 meters away." 10 meters, I raised my hands to measure the distance. Falling silent, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Isn't that basically living in the graveyard?" I continued, "Weren't you scared at night? Never thought about your neighbors? Would they come at midnight to check out this rare group of living people?" Even I shivered at the thought. No way. At the time, I had just arrived in the UK. My English wasn't very good yet, not fluent enough for casual conversation. So I figured ghosts wouldn't bother with me, because no matter what they said, I'd probably just reply with, "Can you speak Chinese?" Or, "I don't understand." The others burst into laughter. Yang Yuding laughed along but soon fell silent. She wiped the sweat off her hands on her pants.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe to NiceGamLii channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any new content. Your support is a huge motivation for me to keep creating better videos. Once again, thank you so much, and see you in the next video.